There is a moment in every life when the soul recognizes itself as a stranger in its own world. It arrives not with fanfare, but with the quiet insistence of truth. A whisper beneath the cacophony of daily existence that says, "This is not where you belong." Not because you are broken, not because you have failed to adapt, but because your essence vibrates at a frequency that resonates with depth the surface world cannot fathom. You have felt this, haven't you? This peculiar homesickness while standing in rooms full of people. This inexplicable longing for something you cannot name while surrounded by everything the world insists should satisfy you. It is the first stirring of recognition, that uncomfortable, undeniable awareness that your soul speaks a different dialect, one fluent in the language of depths, mystery, and the spaces between words. This is where the true journey begins, not in the bright, loud marketplace of collective ambitions, but in the ancient well within, where silence becomes a teacher and solitude a sacred companion. Here, in this interior landscape that others fear to explore, lies the beginning of your real education, for you are being called to something the surface world cannot understand, the archetypal journey of descent, the hero's path that leads not outward to conquest, but inward to integration. Carl Jung understood this calling intimately. He recognized it as the transcendent function, that mysterious capacity of the psyche to bridge opposing worlds, to stand with one foot in the realm of collective consciousness and the other in the vast, uncharted territories of the individual soul. This function does not develop without friction. It requires the tension between what the world demands of you and what your deepest nature knows to be true. This tension, uncomfortable as it may be, is not your enemy. It is the very force that will crack open the shell of who you thought you were and birth who you truly are. The well of self is not a metaphor for the intellectually curious. It is a living reality, the depth dimension of your psyche that extends far beyond the narrow confines of ego consciousness. When you feel that pull towards solitude, when external stimulation begins to feel like assault rather than entertainment, when you find yourself questioning the very foundations others build their lives upon, you are responding to the call of this well. You are being summoned to descend. Ancient cultures understood this summons as sacred. The shamans of Siberia spoke of the calling sickness, a strange malaise that would overtake those destined for the deep work of healing and vision. The Greek mysteries celebrated the katabasis, the necessary journey into the underworld that preceded all genuine spiritual rebirth. The Christian mystics knew it as the dark night of the soul, that seeming abandonment by the divine that actually marks the beginning of authentic union. Every authentic spiritual tradition has recognized this pattern before there can be genuine ascension. There must be conscious descent, but modern culture has forgotten this wisdom. It mistakes the calling for pathology, the summons for sickness. It offers you medications for what it calls depression, therapy for what it labels social anxiety, stimulation for what it misdiagnoses as boredom. It does not understand that what appears to be breakdown is actually breakthrough, the first movement of a transformation so profound that it cannot be accomplished within the comfortable boundaries of surface living. Your otherness is not a bug in the system of your being. It is the feature that marks you as one called to serve not the collective sleep, but the individual awakening. The discomfort you feel in crowds is not social dysfunction but soul resection, the deep part of you that knows it belongs not to the horizontal dimension of surface relationships, but to the vertical dimension where depth meets depth in authentic communion. This recognition often arrives wrapped in what feels like crisis. The job that once seemed tolerable becomes unbearable. The relationships that once provided distraction reveal themselves as superficial. The entertainments that once numbed your longing now feel like insults to your intelligence. The very foundations of your life begin to shift, not because anything external has changed, but because your vision has deepened. You are beginning to see through the eyes of the soul rather than the surface self. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you really are, rather than who you think you should be. It begins with what he termed the transcendent function, that mysterious capacity of the psyche to hold paradox, to bridge opposites, to find the third way that transcends either-or thinking. This function does not develop in comfort. It requires the friction between your inner knowing and outer expectation, between your soul's needs and society's demands. The myth of the hero's journey, found in cultures across the globe, provides the archetypal map for this descent. But unlike the Hollywood version of heroism, all external conquests and public victories, the hero's journey of the deep soul is primarily interior. It is the story of one who must leave the familiar territory of collective consciousness and venture into the unknown wilderness of the individual psyche. This journey begins with what mythologists call the call to adventure, that inner summons that cannot be ignored, that invitation to step beyond the boundaries of conventional life. For the deep soul, this call often manifests as a growing dissatisfaction with surface living, an increasing sensitivity to the hollowness of collective pursuits, a mounting urgency to find something real in a world that feels increasingly artificial. The call may come through crisis, the loss of a job, the end of a relationship, the death of someone significant, or it may arrive more subtly, as a gradual dawning that the life you've been living belongs to someone else, that you've been playing a role in a drama you never consciously chose. However it arrives, this call demands response. You can delay it, distract yourself from it, even deny it for years, but it will not disappear. It is the voice of your own becoming, and it will not be silenced. When you finally answer this call and something in you knows you must, you cross the threshold from the known world into the unknown territories of your own depths. This threshold crossing is rarely dramatic. More often it feels like a quiet recognition, a moment when you stop fighting what you've always known to be true about yourself. You acknowledge that you are not built for surface living, that your soul requires depths that others fear to explore. This acknowledgement is both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because you finally stop trying to be someone you're not. Terrifying because you realize you must now live from a place of authenticity in a world that rewards conformity. You must learn to trust your inner guidance in a culture that insists external validation is the only measure of worth. You must find the courage to be different in a world that punishes difference. But here is the secret that the mythic traditions understood. The very qualities that make you feel like an outsider in the surface world are precisely the qualities that qualify you for the deep work of transformation. Your sensitivity, your need for solitude, your uncomfortable questions, your inability to accept easy answers, these are not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be embraced. They are the tools you will need for the work ahead. The well of self is not a place you visit once and then leave. It is your true home, the depth dimension of your being, that you must learn to inhabit consciously. This learning takes time, patience, and enormous compassion for yourself as you navigate between worlds. You are becoming bilingual, learning to speak both the language of depth and the language of surface when necessary. You are developing what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to bridge inner and outer, to live authentically while engaging meaningfully with the world. This bridge building is the great work of individuation. It requires you to own your depths without becoming lost in them, to honor your sensitivity without becoming victim to it, to trust your inner guidance while remaining grounded in practical reality. It demands that you become neither the isolated hermit nor the shallow extrovert, but something more complex and ultimately more whole. A conscious individual who can move fluidly between solitude and community, depth and surface, inner knowing and outer engagement. The descent into the well of self is not a journey you make once. It is a spiral path you will walk many times, each descent taking you deeper, each return to the surface bringing more wisdom, more integration, more capacity to live authentically in both worlds. Each time you answer the call to depth, you become more yourself, not the self the world wants you to be, but the self you came here to become. This is the beginning of your true education. Not the education of facts and figures, but the education of the soul. Not the learning that comes from books and lectures, but the knowledge that emerges from direct encounter with the depths of your own being. This education has no graduation ceremony because it never ends. It is the lifelong curriculum of becoming fully human, fully yourself, fully awake to the profound mystery of your own existence. The well of self awaits. It has been waiting for you long before you knew to look for it. It will continue to wait, with infinite patience, for those moments when you are ready to descend again, to go deeper, to discover more of who you really are beneath the layers of who you thought you should be. In the depths of this well lies everything you have been seeking on the surface, the belonging you've craved, the meaning you've pursued, the connection you've longed for. But these treasures can only be found by those willing to descend, to trade the false light of surface illumination for the true gold that lies hidden in the darkness of the depths. The journey begins with recognition. You recognize yourself in these words. You feel the truth of them resonating in places you rarely acknowledge. This recognition is not the end, but the beginning. The first sign that you are ready to answer the ancient call to leave the comfortable shallows and to descend into the sacred depths where your real life is waiting to be born. The shadow knows what the persona cannot bear to see, that your otherness is not a wound to be healed, but a sacred marking, the initiate's brand that declares you belong not to the surface world, but to the underground rivers of authentic being. There is a peculiar ache that lives in the chest of those who carry depth in a shallow world. It is not the sharp pain of injury, but the dull, persistent throb of homesickness, except you are homesick for a place you have never been, longing for a tribe you have never met, aching for a conversation you have never had. This is the first sign, the initial recognition that marks you as one who belongs to the depths. You feel like an outsider, not occasionally or situationally, but as a fundamental condition of your existence. This feeling of otherness begins early, often in childhood, as a vague but persistent sense that you are watching life from behind glass. While other children seem to move through their days with easy participation, you find yourself observing, analyzing, wondering why certain things that appear to bring them joy leave you feeling empty. Birthday parties feel overwhelming rather than celebratory. Group activities that others eagerly join make you retreat inward. The laughter that comes so naturally to others feels forced when you attempt it. Your parents, well-meaning but perhaps themselves products of surface culture, try to draw you out. Why don't you go play with the other children? They ask, not understanding that the problem is not shyness, but sensitivity, not social awkwardness, but soul recognition. You are being asked to participate in a world that feels fundamentally foreign to your nature, and your reluctance is not dysfunction, but discernment. As you grow, this feeling of otherness does not diminish, but deepens. In adolescence, when the pressure to conform reaches its peak, you find yourself caught between the desire to belong and the inability to authentically participate in the rituals of surface connection. The parties leave you feeling more alone than solitude ever could. The small talk feels like a form of spiritual suffocation. The concerns that consume your peers, popularity, fashion, the latest entertainment, strike you as curiously hollow, leaving you wondering if something is wrong with you for caring about different things. But here is what the shadow knows that your conscious mind struggles to accept. There is nothing wrong with you. Your otherness is not pathology but prophecy, a sign that you are being called to serve, not the collective sleep but the individual awakening. The very qualities that make you feel like an outsider in surface culture are precisely the ones that mark you as an insider in the deeper dimensions of human experience. Jung understood this paradox intimately. He recognized that the feeling of being an outsider often signals the beginning of individuation, the process by which the psyche differentiates itself from the collective unconscious and begins the journey toward authentic selfhood. This differentiation is not a luxury, but a necessity for certain souls, those who carry what he called the transcendent function, the capacity to bridge different levels of consciousness and serve as mediators between worlds. The shadow, in Jung's understanding, is not the evil part of ourselves, but the disowned part, all those aspects of our nature that we have learned to reject, because they don't fit the accepted image of who we should be. For the deep soul, the shadow often contains not darkness but light, not evil impulses but the very sensitivities and awarenesses that society has taught us to hide. Your shadow may contain your profound intuition, labeled as overthinking by a culture that values quick decisions over deep discernment. It may hold your natural mysticism, dismissed as impractical by a world obsessed with material achievement. It may carry your authentic emotional responses, criticized as too sensitive by those who have learned to numb their feelings in order to function in an insensitive world. The gift of feeling like an outsider is that it forces you to develop a relationship with this shadow, to reclaim these disowned aspects of yourself, not as flaws to be corrected, but as treasures to be integrated. When you stop trying to fit in and start honoring what makes you different, you begin the alchemical process of transforming the lead of alienation into the gold of authentic selfhood. This transformation is not comfortable. It requires you to face the painful truth that you may never belong in the way others seem to belong, that your path will likely be lonelier and more uncertain than the well-traveled roads of conventional success. But it also offers you something that surface belonging can never provide: the deep satisfaction of living from your true nature rather than from an adopted persona. The persona, Jung taught, is the mask we wear to navigate social situations, the carefully constructed image we present to the world. For most people, this persona becomes so automatic that they forget it is a mask. They mistake their social role for their true identity and spend their lives trying to perfect a performance, rather than discovering their authentic nature. But for those who feel like outsiders, the persona never quite fits. You can sense the gap between who you are and who you are pretending to be, and this gap becomes a source of both suffering and awakening. The suffering comes from the exhaustion of constant performance, the loneliness of being seen for your mask, rather than your truth. The awakening comes from the recognition that this gap is not a flaw, but a doorway, an opening through which your authentic self can emerge. The journey from alienation to authenticity requires what Jung called shadow work, the conscious examination and integration of those aspects of ourselves that we have learned to reject. This work begins with the recognition that your otherness is not something to be cured, but something to be explored. Instead of asking, how can I fit in better, you begin to ask, what is this otherness trying to teach me? This shift in questioning marks a crucial turning point. You stop trying to eliminate your differences and start investigating them. You notice that your discomfort in crowds might be sensitivity to energy rather than social anxiety. You recognize that your difficulty with small talk might reflect a deep need for meaningful connection rather than conversational inadequacy. You begin to see that what others have labeled as your problems might actually be your gifts in disguise. The archetypal pattern of the outsider appears throughout mythology and literature as a figure who brings necessary wisdom to the community precisely because they stand apart from it. The shaman who must leave the tribe to receive visions, the fool who speaks truth to power because they have nothing to lose, the mystic who finds God in the wilderness because they cannot find the divine in conventional religion, the artist who creates beauty from their wounds because their sensitivity allows them to feel what others cannot. You are part of this lineage, whether you recognize it or not. Your otherness connects you to a long tradition of individuals who have served as bridges between the known and unknown, the conscious and unconscious, the surface and depth. This is not a burden but a calling, not a handicap but a sacred assignment. But accepting this calling requires tremendous courage. It means acknowledging that you may never have the easy social connections that others seem to enjoy effortlessly. It means accepting that your path will likely be more solitary, more uncertain, requiring you to trust your inner guidance when external validation is scarce. It means embracing your role as what Jung called an introvert, not in the popular sense of being shy, but in the deeper sense of being oriented toward the inner world of meaning, rather than the outer world of activity. This orientation toward interiority is not a weakness, but a specialized psychological function. Just as some people are naturally gifted at navigating the external world of relationships and achievements, You are naturally gifted at navigating the internal world of meaning and depth. Your discomfort with surface interactions is not social failure, but professional discrimination. You are simply not built for that kind of work. The shadow's gift is showing you that what you have experienced as your greatest weakness, your inability to easily belong, is actually your greatest strength. It is the very thing that qualifies you for the deep work of psychological and spiritual transformation, both for yourself and potentially for others. Your outsider status has given you the observer's perspective, the capacity to see patterns and possibilities that those fully embedded in the collective consciousness cannot perceive. This perspective is not always welcome. Truth-tellers are rarely popular, especially when they point out uncomfortable realities about the collective sleep. But this unpopularity is not rejection of your person. It is resistance to your function. You are serving as a mirror, reflecting back aspects of reality that others prefer to ignore. This is sacred work, even when it is lonely work. The integration of your shadow, the reclaiming of your otherness as gift rather than curse, transforms your relationship not only to yourself, but to the world around you. When you stop trying to be accepted by everyone, you become available for authentic connection with those few who can recognize and value your particular gifts. When you stop apologizing for your depth, you create space for others to show you theirs. This is the paradox of belonging. Only by fully accepting your otherness do you become available for genuine connection. Only by stopping your attempts to fit in do you create the possibility of being met in your truth. Only by embracing your role as an outsider do you find your way to the underground community of others who, like you, serve the depths rather than the surface. Your otherness is not a wound to be healed, but a sacred marking, the initiate's brand that declares you belong, not to the surface world, but to the underground rivers of authentic being. The shadow knows this. Even when your conscious mind still struggles with doubt, trust what the shadow knows. It is wiser than your fears and more accurate than your self-criticism. It holds the key to transforming your greatest source of pain into your most profound gift. While others feast on the lightning of constant connection, your soul hungers for the pregnant pause, the sacred emptiness, where thoughts can settle like sediment in still water, revealing the gold that lies beneath life's turbulent surface. There is a particular quality of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from being around too much. Too much noise, too many people, too much stimulation flooding the sensitive nervous system until you feel like a tuning fork struck too many times, vibrating with frequencies that are not your own. This is the second sign of the deep soul. You crave solitude not as escape from the world, but as return to yourself, not as avoidance of others, but as communion with the sacred silence that lives at your core. Modern culture mistakes this craving for pathology. It labels your need for quiet as antisocial behavior, your preference for solitude as depression, your sensitivity to overstimulation as anxiety disorder. It offers you remedies for what it sees as problems, medications to increase your tolerance for chaos, therapies to help you get out there more, advice to push through your discomfort and join the carnival of constant connection. But what if your need for solitude is not a problem to be solved, but a calling to be honored? What if your sensitivity to stimulation is not a weakness to be overcome, but a gift to be protected? What if the very quality that makes others worry about you is actually the doorway to depths they cannot imagine? Jung understood this profound need for interior space as fundamental to what he called the introverted psychological type. But his understanding of introversion went far beyond the popular conception of shyness or social awkwardness. For Jung, introversion represented a fundamental orientation of consciousness toward the inner world, not because the outer world is rejected, but because the inner world requires careful tending in order to serve its proper function in the wholeness of the psyche. The introverted soul, Jung observed, draws energy not from external stimulation but from internal reflection, where the extroverted consciousness thrives on interaction, activity, and sensory input. The introverted consciousness requires periods of withdrawal, contemplation, and what he called active imagination. the conscious engagement with the images, symbols, and movements that emerge from the depths of the unconscious. This is not laziness or avoidance. This is essential psychological work. In the silence and solitude that others fear, you are performing the sacred task of integration, allowing the experiences of your day to settle into deeper layers of understanding, permitting the wisdom of your unconscious to rise into conscious awareness, creating the inner spaciousness necessary for genuine insight to emerge. The alchemists of old understood this process intimately. They called it the nigredo, the necessary darkness, the phase of dissolution that must precede all genuine transformation. In their retorts and crucibles, they created conditions of contained stillness, where the raw material of experience could break down into its essential components, where the dross could be separated from the gold, where the philosopher's stone of integrated wisdom could slowly crystallize. Your need for solitude serves this same alchemical function. In the quiet of your own company, away from the demands and expectations of others, you create the laboratory conditions necessary for psychological transformation. The stimulation that energizes others would interfere with this delicate process, like trying to see the stars while staring into the sun, or attempting to hear the whisper of intuition over the roar of constant activity. But this understanding does not come easily in a culture addicted to noise. From the moment you wake to the manufactured urgency of news alerts, to the time you fall asleep to the blue glow of screens, modern life offers little respite from stimulation. The spaces between activities have been filled with entertainment, the pauses in conversation occupied by devices, the natural rhythms of reflection interrupted by the artificial rhythms of constant connectivity. In this environment, your craving for silence feels countercultural, almost revolutionary. When you choose to spend an evening alone with a book instead of attending a social gathering, when you prefer a solitary walk to a crowded event, when you find yourself declining invitations, not from dislike of the people involved, but from recognition of your own deeper needs, you are making a radical statement about the nature of nourishment. You are declaring that your soul feeds on different sustenance than what the culture provides. Where others derive energy from external stimulation, you generate power through internal cultivation. Where others find meaning in shared activity, you discover significance in private reflection. Where others seek validation through constant interaction, you find confirmation through intimate dialogue with your own depths. This difference in nutritional needs, for that is what it truly is, a fundamental difference in what feeds your psychological and spiritual life, often creates misunderstanding in relationships. Friends and family may interpret your need for solitude as rejection of them personally. They may feel hurt when you decline social invitations, worried when you spend time alone, confused by your apparent contentment with your own company. But their concern often reveals more about their own relationship to solitude than about your psychological health. In a culture that fears silence, that equates being alone with being lonely, that mistakes constant activity for meaningful engagement, your comfort with solitude can feel threatening to those who have never learned to be alone with themselves without discomfort. Jung called this the extroversion of the age, the collective assumption that meaning, value, and energy come primarily from external sources. This assumption runs so deep that many people literally do not know how to be alone without feeling anxious, depressed, or empty. They have become so dependent on external stimulation for their sense of aliveness that solitude feels like a kind of death. But for the deep soul, solitude is not death, but birth, the birthplace of authentic thoughts, genuine feelings, and original insights. It is in the quiet spaces that you discover what you actually think beneath the noise of others' opinions, what you truly feel beneath the influence of others' emotions, what you genuinely value beneath the pressure of others' expectations. This discovery process requires what the mystics called the desert, not the physical desert, but the psychological space of emptiness, where the ego's constant chatter can finally quiet enough for the deeper voice of the self to be heard. In this interior desert, stripped of the distractions and definitions that others provide, you encounter the raw reality of your own being. This encounter is not always comfortable. In the silence, you meet not only your wisdom but your wounds, not only your clarity but your confusion, not only your strength but your vulnerabilities. The stimulation that others use to avoid these difficult aspects of themselves is not available to you. Your sensitivity makes such avoidance impossible. Your depth makes such denial futile. But this inability to avoid or deny becomes, paradoxically, your greatest strength. Because you cannot run from your inner life, you must learn to work with it consciously. Because stimulation overwhelms rather than energizes you, you develop other sources of vitality, the slow burn of contemplation rather than the quick flame of excitement, the steady pulse of reflection rather than the rapid heartbeat of activity. In the pregnant pause that others rush to fill, you learn to wait for what wants to emerge naturally. In the sacred emptiness that others fear as void, you discover the fullness of your own depths. In the silence that others interpret as absence, you find the presence of something vast and nourishing that cannot be captured in words, but can be lived as a reality more solid than any external achievement. This capacity to find sustenance in silence, to generate energy through reflection, to discover meaning in solitude, marks you as what Jung might call a carrier of consciousness, one whose psychological function in the larger human community is to maintain connection to the deeper layers of experience that surface culture tends to ignore or deny. Your craving for solitude serves not only your individual development, but also a collective need for depth that often goes unrecognized in a world increasingly oriented toward surface interactions and immediate gratifications. You serve as a guardian of the interior dimensions of human experience. Your insistence on quiet time, reflection space, and contemplative practices keeps alive ways of being that the culture desperately needs, but rarely values. This is sacred work, even when it appears to others as inactivity. The insights that emerge from your solitude, the clarity that develops through your reflection, the wisdom that crystallizes in your silence, these gifts could not exist without the patient cultivation that only comes through sustained time alone. You are not avoiding life, but going deeper into it, not escaping reality, but discovering layers of reality that constant stimulation obscures. The silence between thunder is not empty. It is pregnant with the next movement of the storm. Your solitude is not absence but presence, not withdrawal but deeper engagement, not avoidance but preparation for the kind of authentic interaction that can only emerge from those who know themselves intimately enough to share something real. In protecting your need for silence, you are protecting something precious not only for yourself, but for everyone whose life you touch. For it is only from the depths of genuine solitude that genuine intimacy becomes possible, only from the ground of authentic self-knowledge that authentic relationship can grow, only from the silence of deep reflection that words worth speaking can emerge. Your craving for solitude over stimulation is not a sign of dysfunction, but of devotion, devotion to the inner work that transforms not only your own consciousness, but contributes to the collective awakening that our overstimulated, undernourished world so desperately needs. In the museum of collective assumptions, you are the one who notices the artifacts others walk past, whose curious fingers trace the fault lines in conventional wisdom, unearthing the buried questions that make others uncomfortable. There is a particular quality of restlessness that lives in minds oriented toward depth, not the restlessness of boredom, but the restlessness of recognition, the uncomfortable awareness that beneath every answer lies another question, that behind every explanation lurks a mystery, that within every certainty pulses a doubt that most people prefer to ignore. This is the third sign of the deep soul. You ask questions others avoid, not to be difficult or contrarian, but because your psyche is naturally drawn to the edges of understanding, the places where knowledge gives way to wonder. From childhood, you were likely the one who couldn't accept because I said so as a sufficient answer, who wanted to know not just what but why, not just how but what it all means. While other children absorbed information readily, you found yourself probing beneath the surface, sensing that the answers you were given were somehow incomplete, that there were deeper layers of truth waiting to be explored. This questioning nature often made you an inconvenient child. Teachers preferred students who absorbed lessons without challenging their foundations. Parents appreciated children who followed rules without examining their logic. Peers enjoyed companions who shared their interests without philosophizing about their significance. But you couldn't help yourself. Your mind naturally moved toward the questions that others seemed content to leave unasked. As you matured, this tendency didn't diminish, but deepened. You found yourself drawn to the fundamental questions that underlie human existence. What is the nature of consciousness? Why is there something rather than nothing? What does it mean to live a meaningful life? How do we know what we know? What lies beyond death? These questions weren't academic curiosities for you. They were urgent inquiries that seemed to pulse with existential necessity. Jung understood this compulsion to ask deeper questions as a manifestation of what he called the transcendent function, the psyche's innate drive toward truth and wholeness. This function operates like an internal compass, always pointing toward what is not yet known, not yet integrated, not yet conscious. It creates a natural dissatisfaction with surface explanations and easy answers, a persistent hunger for understanding that goes beyond conventional wisdom. This psychological function serves a crucial role in human development, both individual and collective. Without those who ask uncomfortable questions, without those who probe beneath accepted truths, without those who refuse to be satisfied with surface explanations, consciousness would stagnate in comfortable but limited understanding. The questioner serves as an agent of psychological evolution, pressing against the boundaries of what is known to expand the territory of what can be understood. But this role comes with a price. The one who asks uncomfortable questions often becomes uncomfortable to be around. Your inquiries challenge not just ideas but identities, not just beliefs but the psychological structures that others use to feel safe in an uncertain world. When you ask, but what if we're wrong about this? Or have we considered this alternative perspective? Or what assumptions are we making that we haven't examined? You threaten the comfortable sleep of collective certainty. This threat is rarely welcomed. Most people have enough anxiety managing the known challenges of existence without having you point out the unknown complexities they've successfully ignored. Your questions can feel like attacks on their carefully constructed understanding of reality. Your curiosity can seem like criticism of their acceptance of conventional wisdom. The archetypal pattern of the questioner appears throughout mythology and history as a figure who brings necessary but unwelcome illumination. Socrates, who claimed to know only that he knew nothing, was executed by Athens for corrupting youth with his relentless questioning. The biblical Job challenged the fundamental assumptions about divine justice, earning both profound insight and considerable suffering. The fool in tarot represents the courage to ask naive questions that reveal profound truths. You belong to this lineage, whether you recognize it or not. Your compulsion to question is not intellectual arrogance but psychological necessity. Your mind is constructed to serve the function of inquiry, to probe the fault lines in collective understanding, to excavate the buried assumptions that shape how we see reality. This archaeological function of consciousness requires particular psychological tools. Like a careful excavator, you must learn to dig beneath surface appearances without destroying what you find. You must develop the capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to entertain contradictory possibilities, to live comfortably with uncertainty while continuing to seek understanding. Jung called this capacity holding the tension of opposites, the ability to sustain psychological paradox without rushing toward premature resolution. This skill is essential for the deep questioner, because the most important questions rarely have simple answers. They require the ability to sit with complexity, to tolerate ambiguity, to remain open to possibilities that haven't yet emerged. The questions that attract your attention are rarely the ones with clear solutions. You're drawn instead to the mysteries that have puzzled humans across cultures and centuries: the nature of love, the meaning of suffering, the reality of death, the possibility of transcendence. These questions don't have answers in the conventional sense. They have depths that can be explored endlessly, layers that reveal themselves only to sustained inquiry. Your questioning mind operates differently than the problem-solving mind that education systems typically reward. The problem-solving mind seeks to eliminate uncertainty through finding correct answers. Your questioning mind seeks to deepen uncertainty through discovering more profound questions. Where the problem solver finds relief in resolution, you find excitement in revelation. The moment when a question opens into an even deeper mystery. This difference in mental orientation often creates confusion in educational and professional settings that value quick answers over deep inquiry. You may have struggled in environments that rewarded memorization over contemplation, that preferred speed over thoroughness, that measured success by the ability to provide predetermined answers rather than generate meaningful questions. But the very qualities that made you seem slow or difficult in conventional educational settings are actually signs of a more sophisticated form of intelligence, what some researchers call wisdom intelligence, as opposed to crystallized intelligence. While crystallized intelligence involves the accumulation and application of known information, wisdom intelligence involves the recognition of the limits of knowledge and the skillful navigation of uncertainty. Your questioning nature represents this wisdom intelligence in operation. You instinctively recognize that the most important aspects of human experience, love, meaning, beauty, truth, cannot be fully captured in conceptual frameworks. Your questions probe not toward final answers, but toward deeper appreciation of mystery, not toward the elimination of wonder, but toward the cultivation of what Keats called negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainty and doubt without irritably reaching after fact and reason. This capacity serves not only your individual development, but also the collective need for what Jung called the renewal of consciousness. Every generation must rediscover fundamental truths for itself, must question inherited assumptions, must examine the foundations of its worldview. Without individuals who maintain this questioning function, cultures become rigid and consciousness becomes stagnant. Your uncomfortable questions serve as catalysts for this renewal process. When you ask, what if we're approaching this backwards, or have we considered what we might be missing, or what would change if we questioned this basic assumption, you create openings for new understanding to emerge. Your questions function like controlled explosions, breaking up the hardened ground of conventional thinking so that new growth can take root. But this catalytic function requires tremendous courage. To question deeply is to risk discovering that cherished beliefs are unfounded, that comfortable certainties are illusions, that the foundations you've built your life upon may be less solid than you thought. It requires what Rilke called the willingness to live the questions, to inhabit uncertainty as a creative space rather than flee from it as a threat. This willingness to live in question marks you as what the existentialists might call an authentic questioner, one who questions not to show off intellectual superiority, but to maintain genuine contact with the mystery of existence. Your questions emerge not from cynicism but from wonder, not from the desire to tear down but from the need to understand more deeply. The questions you ask often reveal as much about you as they do about the subjects you're exploring. They point toward the particular edges of your understanding, the specific mysteries that call to your soul, the unique angles from which you approach the eternal puzzles of human existence. In this sense, your questioning is itself a form of self-revelation, a way of discovering not just what you don't know, but what kinds of unknowing most fascinate and challenge you. Over time, you may notice patterns in your questioning, certain themes that recur, particular types of assumptions you're drawn to examine, specific angles of inquiry that feel most natural to you. These patterns reveal what Jung might call your personal myth, the unique story that your psyche is trying to understand and live. Some questioners are drawn to the mystery of consciousness, probing the relationship between mind and matter, self and world. Others focus on questions of meaning, exploring what gives life significance and purpose. Still others investigate the nature of relationship, examining how separate beings can genuinely connect across the apparent isolation of individual existence. Your particular constellation of questions forms a kind of psychological fingerprint, as unique to you as your physical features but far more revealing of your essential nature. These questions are not random curiosities but expressions of your deepest concerns, indicators of the specific contribution you're meant to make to the collective understanding of what it means to be human. The archaeologist of being that you have become through your questioning doesn't seek to possess the artifacts of truth, but to honor them through careful attention. Your questions are tools of reverence rather than conquest, instruments of appreciation rather than domination. You dig not to own what you find, but to witness it, to bring it into the light of consciousness where it can be seen and wondered at. In a world increasingly satisfied with surface explanations and quick answers, your dedication to deeper questioning serves as a guardian of mystery, a protector of wonder, a reminder that the most important aspects of existence cannot be reduced to simple formulas or easy solutions. Your questions keep alive the recognition that reality is far stranger, more beautiful, and more profound than our current understanding can encompass. The questions you ask may never be fully answered, but that is not their failure, it is their gift. They keep you in relationship with the mystery of existence. They maintain your sense of wonder. They prevent the spiritual complacency that comes from thinking you have life figured out. In remaining open to question, you remain open to growth, to surprise, to the possibility that tomorrow you might discover something that transforms everything you thought you knew today. This openness, this willingness to live in question rather than settle for premature answers, marks you as one who serves not the comfort of certainty, but the adventure of consciousness. Your questions are invitations to others to join you in this adventure, to move beyond the museum of inherited assumptions into the living laboratory of ongoing discovery. The empathic soul carries in its depths the echo of collective wounding, feeling through its own nervous system the unspoken grief of others, like a tuning fork that resonates with frequencies most cannot hear but all unconsciously emit. There is a particular burden that comes with being psychologically porous, the inability to maintain clean boundaries between your emotional experience and the emotional atmosphere that surrounds you. You walk into a room and immediately sense the tension no one is acknowledging. You sit beside someone and feel their sadness seeping into your bones before they even speak. You watch the news and carry the weight of distant strangers' suffering as if it were your own. This is the fourth sign of the deep soul. You feel others' pain deeply, not as occasional empathy, but as a constant, unavoidable reality that shapes how you move through the world. This heightened sensitivity to others' emotional states often begins in childhood, as a mysterious ability to know things you shouldn't know, that your teacher is struggling with something at home, that your friend is hiding hurt behind their laughter, that your parent is carrying worry they haven't shared. Other children seem able to focus on their own experience without being constantly interrupted by awareness of others' inner lives, but for you, the emotional field is always present, always demanding attention. Your family may have labeled this sensitivity in various ways. Perhaps they called you too sensitive or overly emotional, not understanding that you weren't simply reacting to your own feelings but processing the unacknowledged feelings of everyone around you. Perhaps they assigned you the role of the family emotional barometer, the one who could always tell when storms were brewing beneath calm surfaces, or perhaps they dismissed your perceptions entirely, insisting that you were imagining things, making you doubt the validity of your own empathic experience. But what family members and friends often interpreted as your problem was actually your gift, a refined capacity for emotional perception that operates below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Jung understood this phenomenon as part of what he called the participation mystique, the unconscious psychic connection that exists between individuals despite their apparent separation. Some people, he observed, are naturally more susceptible to this unconscious communication, more permeable to what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological substrate that underlies individual consciousness. This permeability is not weakness, but a specialized psychological function. Just as some people have exceptional visual acuity that allows them to see details others miss, You have exceptional emotional acuity that allows you to perceive the feeling tones that others cannot detect. This capacity serves important functions both for your individual development and for the communities you inhabit, though it often feels more like curse than blessing. The archetypal pattern that best describes this sensitivity is what Jung called the wounded healer, the figure who can minister to others suffering precisely because they have intimate knowledge of pain. This archetype appears throughout mythology and spiritual traditions. Chiron, the centaur who could heal others but not himself. Jesus, who took upon himself the sins of the world. The shamans who must undergo initiatory illness to develop their healing powers. The wounded healer possesses the capacity to feel others' pain, not through imagination but through direct experience. When you sense someone's sadness, you don't simply understand it intellectually. You feel it in your body, experience it as a weight in your chest, carry it as an ache in your bones. This direct transmission of emotional experience creates both profound empathy and considerable suffering, but this suffering is not meaningless. According to Jung's understanding, the wounded healer's pain serves a crucial function in the process of psychological transformation. By feeling what others cannot or will not feel, by carrying emotional burdens that others unconsciously discharge, the wounded healer serves as a kind of psychic transformer, taking in raw unconscious material and converting it into conscious awareness through the alchemy of personal experience. This process is exhausting and often overwhelming. You may find yourself crying for reasons you can't explain, feeling inexplicably heavy after being around certain people, or experiencing emotional states that don't seem to belong to your personal circumstances. Friends and family may worry about your mood swings, your sensitivity to environments, your apparent inability to toughen up or develop thicker skin. But what they interpret as emotional instability is actually emotional permeability, a nervous system so finely tuned that it picks up psychological frequencies others cannot detect. You are serving as an early warning system for emotional weather patterns, a canary in the coal mine of collective psychological health. Your sensitivity reveals not just individual suffering but cultural wounding, not just personal pain but systemic dysfunction. This revelatory function of deep empathy is rarely appreciated by those around you. Most people prefer to manage their own emotional experience by keeping it unconscious, projecting unwanted feelings onto others, rather than owning them directly. Your capacity to feel what they refuse to acknowledge threatens this psychological defense system. Your tears may reveal their hidden sadness. Your anxiety may expose their unacknowledged fear. Your anger may reflect their disowned rage. This dynamic creates a complex relationship between you and those whose emotional states you absorb. They may simultaneously depend on your emotional sensitivity to process feelings they cannot handle directly, while resenting you for reflecting back to them what they prefer to keep hidden. You become both therapist and scapegoat, both healer and repository for others' unwanted psychological material. Learning to navigate this challenging position requires what Jung called conscious suffering, the ability to experience pain without being destroyed by it, to feel deeply without losing yourself in the feeling. This capacity develops slowly through repeated experiences of being overwhelmed by others' emotions and gradually learning to distinguish between what belongs to you and what you're carrying for others. The process of developing this discrimination is itself a form of individuation, the gradual separation of your authentic emotional experience from the emotional field in which you're embedded. This doesn't mean becoming less empathic, but rather becoming more conscious about your empathy, more skillful in how you handle the emotional information you receive. Part of this skill involves learning to create what psychologists call permeable boundaries, boundaries that can open to receive important emotional information, but close to prevent overwhelming absorption of others' psychological material. This is a delicate balance, requiring you to remain sensitive enough to serve your empathic function, while developing enough containment to prevent being consumed by others' pain. The development of these skills often involves what appears to be a period of withdrawal or increased sensitivity. You may find yourself avoiding crowds, limiting social interactions, becoming more selective about the emotional environments you enter. Others may interpret this as antisocial behavior or depression, but it's actually a necessary phase in learning to manage your empathic capacity consciously. This withdrawal period serves multiple functions. It allows your nervous system to recover from the constant bombardment of others' emotional states. It provides space for you to reconnect with your own authentic feelings beneath the layers of absorbed emotion. Most importantly, it creates the conditions necessary for you to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing psychological forces in creative tension rather than being torn apart by them. The transcendent function in the context of deep empathy involves learning to feel others' pain without becoming identified with it, to carry their emotional experience without losing connection to your own. This requires a kind of psychological alchemy, transforming the raw material of absorbed emotion into conscious understanding, converting overwhelming sensitivity into healing wisdom. This transformation is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing process. Each encounter with others' pain offers an opportunity to practice this alchemical skill, to learn more about the subtle art of empathic engagement without empathic drowning. Over time, you develop what might be called conscious compassion, the ability to respond to others' suffering with presence and understanding rather than absorption and overwhelm. This conscious compassion serves not only your own psychological health, but also the genuine healing needs of those whose pain you feel. When you can remain present to others' suffering without being consumed by it, you offer them something far more valuable than sympathy. You provide a stable, conscious container for their pain, a reliable presence that can witness their struggle without being destabilized by it. This capacity to serve as a conscious container for others' pain is one of the most profound gifts the wounded healer can offer. It provides those in distress with the experience of being truly seen and felt in their suffering, while offering them the hope that pain can be held without destroying the one who holds it. Your ability to feel their pain deeply while maintaining your psychological center demonstrates that healing is possible, that suffering can be transformed rather than simply endured. But this gift comes with a price. The wounded healer often struggles with what Jung called the helper's shadow, the unconscious tendency to become addicted to others' neediness, to find identity and purpose primarily through rescuing or fixing others. This shadow expresses itself in martyrdom, codependency, and the inability to receive care while constantly giving it. Working with this shadow requires recognizing that your empathic sensitivity serves not just others' healing but your own individuation. Each experience of feeling others' pain deeply offers insight into the nature of human suffering, the patterns of psychological wounding, the possibilities for transformation. This insight becomes wisdom only when it's integrated into your own life, only when you apply to your own healing what you've learned through witnessing others' pain. The ultimate gift of the wounded healer archetype is not the ability to fix others, but the capacity to model conscious relationship to suffering. By learning to feel deeply without drowning, to care without controlling, to heal without losing yourself in the healing, you demonstrate possibilities that others may not know exist. Your journey from overwhelming sensitivity to conscious compassion becomes a living teaching about the transformation of psychological pain into spiritual wisdom. This transformation serves the collective as well as the individual. In a culture that tends to medicate pain rather than understand it, to avoid suffering rather than learn from it, your capacity to feel deeply and consciously provides a counterbalance to the collective tendency toward emotional numbing. You serve as a keeper of emotional authenticity, a guardian of the full spectrum of human feeling in a world that often prefers surface pleasantness to deep truth. Your sensitivity to others' pain, overwhelming as it may sometimes feel, connects you to the profound interconnectedness that underlies apparent separation. In feeling others' suffering as your own, you experience directly what the mystics have always known, that the boundaries between self and other are more permeable than the ego would like to believe, that healing one person contributes to the healing of all. This recognition transforms your empathic sensitivity from burden to sacred assignment, from curse to calling. You are not too sensitive for this world. You are exactly sensitive enough for the healing work this world desperately needs. Where others see coincidence, you recognize the golden thread weaving through the fabric of experience, connecting seemingly random events in a tapestry that reveals the hidden intelligence orchestrating existence. There is a particular kind of vision that develops in those who live close to the depths, not the vision of the eyes, but the vision of the soul, the capacity to perceive connections that exist below the threshold of ordinary awareness. You have always been one who notices the threads that others miss, who sees the patterns that weave through experience like underground rivers, invisible to surface dwellers but unmistakably real to those who have learned to read the signs. This is the fifth sign of the deep soul. You see patterns others miss, not through superior intellect but through refined perception, through a way of seeing that recognizes meaning where others perceive only randomness. This pattern recognition begins early, often in childhood, as an uncanny ability to sense when seemingly unrelated events are actually connected. Perhaps you noticed that certain dreams preceded specific occurrences in waking life. Perhaps you observed that emotional atmospheres in your family followed predictable cycles that no one else seemed to track. Perhaps you found yourself making associations between experiences that others dismissed as unrelated, yet you could feel the invisible threads connecting them with certainty that defied logical explanation. Your teachers may have praised your ability to see connections in academic subjects, to link concepts across disciplines, to recognize themes that recurred in different contexts, to synthesize information in ways that revealed larger patterns, but they may have been less appreciative when you pointed out patterns in classroom dynamics, in the hidden curricula of social expectations, in the unacknowledged connections between what was taught and what was lived. As you matured, this pattern-seeing capacity deepened and refined itself. You began to notice not just intellectual connections, but what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that suggest an underlying order to existence that goes beyond causal explanation. The book that falls open to exactly the page you needed to read. The conversation overheard at precisely the moment when its message could provide guidance. The series of events that seemed random but when viewed together, revealed a clear direction or teaching. Jung understood synchronicity as evidence of what he called the acausal principle, an organizing force in the universe that operates not through mechanical cause and effect, but through meaning and significance. This principle suggests that events can be connected, not just by linear causation, but by their participation in larger patterns of significance that transcend individual will or conscious intention. Your capacity to perceive these patterns marks you as what might be called an alchemist of meaning, one who can transmute the base metal of apparently random experience into the gold of conscious understanding. This alchemical function operates through what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to perceive connections that bridge different levels of consciousness, to recognize unity within apparent multiplicity. This function serves crucial purposes both for individual development and collective understanding. On the personal level, your pattern recognition allows you to navigate life's complexities with a kind of internal GPS that others lack. You can sense when you're moving in harmony with larger forces and when you're working against the grain of natural unfolding. You can read the signs that indicate whether a relationship, opportunity, or direction is aligned with your deeper purposes. But this gift comes with its own challenges. Seeing patterns that others cannot perceive can be isolating and sometimes overwhelming. You may find yourself trying to explain connections that seem obvious to you but invisible to others, leading to misunderstandings and questions about your judgment or even your mental stability. The pattern-blind world often treats those who see deeper connections with suspicion, dismissing their perceptions as projection, wishful thinking, or even delusion. This dismissal is particularly painful because the patterns you see are not fantasies but genuine perceptions of subtle relationships that exist below the threshold of ordinary awareness. Your ability to detect these patterns represents a form of intelligence that goes beyond linear reasoning, what some researchers call intuitive intelligence or systems thinking. This intelligence operates not through step-by-step logical analysis but through holistic perception that grasps complex relationships instantaneously. The development of this intelligence requires a particular kind of attention, what might be called soft focus as opposed to the hard focus that conventional education rewards. Hard focus involves concentrating on specific details, analyzing component parts, breaking complex phenomena into manageable pieces. Soft focus involves relaxing analytical control and allowing patterns to emerge naturally from the wider field of awareness. This soft focus attention is essential for perceiving synchronicities and other meaningful patterns, because these connections often exist at the periphery of consciousness rather than in its center. They require a receptive rather than aggressive mental stance, an openness to surprise rather than a demand for predictability. The patterns you see emerge not through forcing your way to understanding, but through allowing understanding to reveal itself. This receptive stance connects your pattern recognition to ancient wisdom traditions that recognize divination not as superstition but as a sophisticated technology for reading the subtle signs through which larger intelligence communicates. The I Ching's hexagrams, the Tarot's archetypal images, the runes' symbolic messages, all of these systems operate on the principle that meaning patterns exist within apparent randomness and can be read by those who have developed the appropriate perceptual skills. Your natural capacity for pattern recognition places you in this tradition of meaning readers, those who serve as interpreters of the subtle communications through which life reveals its deeper purposes. This is not fortune-telling but wisdom-seeking, the ancient art of reading the signs through which existence speaks to those who have learned its language. But this language is not fixed or mechanical. The patterns you perceive are not rigid laws but fluid relationships that shift and evolve as consciousness itself evolves. Each synchronicity, each meaningful coincidence, each unexpected connection reveals not only information about external circumstances, but also insight into your own psychological state, your current level of awareness, your readiness to receive certain teachings or opportunities. This interplay between inner and outer, between psychological state and external pattern, reveals one of the most profound aspects of your pattern recognition. It operates at the intersection between subjective experience and objective reality, suggesting that these apparently separate realms are more intimately connected than conventional thinking assumes. The patterns you see reflect not only what is happening out there, but also what is developing in here in the depths of your own psychological and spiritual unfolding. This recognition transforms your pattern seeing from mere observation to active participation in the creative process of consciousness itself. When you recognize a meaningful pattern, you are not just seeing what exists, but participating in its emergence. Your awareness of the pattern becomes part of the pattern. Your recognition of its significance contributes to its significance. This participatory aspect of pattern recognition explains why synchronicities often seem to increase when you pay attention to them and decrease when you ignore them. The patterns exist in potential until conscious awareness activates them, much as quantum particles exist in superposition until observation collapses them into definite states. Your attention serves as a creative force that helps bring meaningful patterns into manifestation. But this creative power requires careful stewardship. The capacity to see patterns can become distorted into the compulsion to see patterns everywhere, even where none exist. Jung warned of this shadow aspect of synchronicity awareness, the tendency to find meaning in every coincidence, to interpret every random event as a significant message, to lose the ability to distinguish between genuine patterns and projected patterns. Working with this shadow requires developing what might be called pattern discrimination, the ability to distinguish between authentic synchronicities that carry genuine meaning and mere coincidences that reflect only random occurrence. This discrimination develops through experience, through careful attention to which perceived patterns actually bear fruit in lived experience, and which ones lead to dead ends or self-deception. The cultivation of this discrimination is itself an alchemical process, requiring you to refine your perceptual skills through repeated practice and honest assessment. You learn to trust patterns that consistently reveal deeper truth, while releasing attachment to patterns that reflect more wish than wisdom. This process of refinement transforms your pattern recognition from passive observation to active collaboration with the intelligence that orchestrates meaningful experience. Over time, you may notice that the patterns you perceive begin to organize themselves around certain themes or archetypal configurations. Some pattern seers are particularly attuned to relational patterns, the ways that people's psychological dynamics create predictable interactions and outcomes. Others focus on temporal patterns, the rhythms and cycles that govern personal and collective development. Still others specialize in what might be called purpose patterns, the ways that individual callings and collective needs align to create opportunities for meaningful service. These specializations reflect not arbitrary preferences but genuine aspects of your psychological and spiritual nature. The particular kinds of patterns that most readily reveal themselves to your perception indicate the specific ways that your consciousness is meant to serve the larger intelligence that moves through existence. You are not just seeing patterns randomly but being trained to perceive the particular patterns most relevant to your unique contribution to the collective awakening. This training happens not through formal instruction but through lived experience, through the accumulation of encounters with meaningful coincidences, significant connections and revelatory patterns. Each synchronicity becomes a teaching, each meaningful pattern an initiation into deeper levels of pattern recognition. Your capacity evolves organically, shaped by the specific challenges and opportunities that your individual path presents. The ultimate purpose of this pattern recognition extends beyond personal guidance to collective service. In a world increasingly fragmented by specialization and analysis, your capacity to see connections across apparent separations serves a crucial healing function. You help restore awareness of the underlying unity that connects seemingly disparate phenomena, the web of relationships that sustains all existence. This restoration of connection awareness is not merely philosophical but intensely practical. The ecological crisis, social fragmentation, and psychological isolation that characterize modern life all reflect the collective loss of pattern recognition, the inability to perceive the connections that make wholeness possible. Your capacity to see these connections serves as medicine for this cultural blindness. When you point out patterns that others miss, the connection between personal trauma and social dysfunction, the relationship between environmental destruction and spiritual emptiness, the link between individual healing and collective transformation, you are serving as an agent of integration, helping to heal the artificial separations that create so much unnecessary suffering. This healing function operates not through preaching or teaching, but through simple recognition, through the offering of your perception to others who may benefit from seeing what you see. Sometimes this offering is direct, sharing your insights explicitly when others seem open to receiving them. Sometimes it is indirect, living from your pattern awareness in ways that demonstrate its value without imposing it on others. But whether direct or indirect, your service as a pattern reader requires tremendous humility. The patterns you see are real, but your interpretation of them is always partial, always limited by the boundaries of your current understanding. The meaning you perceive is genuine, but it may not be the only meaning, may not be the most important meaning for others who are working with different patterns or following different threads of understanding. This humility transforms your pattern recognition from dogmatic certainty to living inquiry, from fixed interpretation to fluid exploration. You hold your perceptions lightly, remaining open to new information, deeper patterns, more complete understanding. This openness keeps your pattern recognition fresh and prevents it from calcifying into rigid systems that obscure more than they reveal. In serving as an alchemist of meaning, you participate in the ancient and ongoing work of consciousness itself, the transformation of raw experience into refined understanding, the conversion of apparent randomness into recognized pattern, the translation of mysterious synchronicity into lived wisdom. This work serves not only your individual development, but the collective evolution of consciousness itself, helping to midwife the emergence of new levels of meaning and connection in a world desperately hungry for both. The golden thread you perceive weaving through experience is not separate from you, but includes you, not something you observe from outside, but something you participate in from within. Your recognition of the pattern is part of the pattern, Your awareness of the meaning contributes to the meaning. In seeing the connections others miss, you help create the very connections you see, serving as both witness and participant in the ongoing revelation of the intelligence that dreams the world into being. In the marketplace of shallow exchange, your soul recoils like a deep-sea creature, suddenly exposed to harsh surface light, recognizing that beneath the social pleasantries lies a hunger for connection that words rarely satisfy. There is a particular form of existential claustrophobia that overcomes the deep soul when trapped in conversations about weather, traffic, and weekend plans, not because these topics are inherently meaningless, but because they serve as elaborate rituals of avoidance, carefully choreographed dances around the very connections the heart most desperately craves. This is the sixth sign of the depth-oriented psyche. You struggle with small talk, not from arrogance or antisocial tendencies, but because your soul recognizes the profound hunger for authenticity that lies beneath these surface exchanges and grieves for what remains unspoken, unshared, unknown. This struggle often begins in childhood as a puzzling inability to engage in the casual conversations that others seem to navigate effortlessly. While your peers chatted easily about television shows, games, or school gossip, you found yourself either silent or attempting to steer conversations toward topics that felt more substantial, questions about life, death, meaning, wonder. Your contributions were often met with blank stares or uncomfortable shifts away from subjects that seemed too heavy, too serious, too much for casual interaction. Teachers and parents may have interpreted your conversational style as either precocious or problematic. Perhaps they praised your thoughtfulness while simultaneously encouraging you to lighten up or just have fun with your peers. Perhaps they worried that your serious nature would isolate you socially, not understanding that your apparent difficulty with casual conversation reflected not social deficiency but spiritual sensitivity, an inability to participate in exchanges that felt disconnected from authentic human experience. As you matured, this challenge with superficial communication didn't resolve, but intensified. Office small talk about sports scores and celebrity gossip left you feeling spiritually malnourished. Party conversations about vacation destinations and home renovations made you feel like you were slowly suffocating. Social media exchanges filled with surface-level sharing and performative positivity struck you as elaborate forms of mutual isolation disguised as connection. Jung understood this struggle through his exploration of what he called the persona, the psychological mask we wear to navigate social situations. For most people, the persona functions as a useful tool, allowing them to interact smoothly in various social contexts without exposing their deeper vulnerabilities or complexities. But for the depth-oriented soul, the persona often feels like a costume that doesn't fit, a role that requires exhausting performance of a self that feels fundamentally inauthentic. Your difficulty with small talk reflects not an inability to master social skills, but a profound allergy to inauthenticity. When conversations remain on the surface, your psyche experiences something akin to spiritual malnutrition, the peculiar emptiness that comes from engaging in exchanges that feed social convention, while starving the deeper hunger for meaningful connection. This hunger for authentic communication operates at a level that transcends mere preference. Your nervous system, finely tuned to detect authenticity and its absence, literally reacts to superficial exchanges as a form of existential threat. The energy required to participate in conversations that feel empty or false drains your psychological resources in ways that others cannot understand because they do not experience this same sensitivity to authenticity. But what others interpret as your limitation, your apparent inability to engage in normal social interaction, is actually a refined capacity for detecting the difference between genuine and performative communication. You serve as what might be called a guardian of authenticity, one whose very discomfort with surface exchanges protects something precious that casual conversation tends to erode, the recognition that human beings have depths that deserve acknowledgement, complexities that merit exploration, mysteries that invite investigation. This guardian function operates unconsciously through your natural responses to different types of communication. When someone shares something real, a genuine fear, an authentic joy, a moment of vulnerability or wonder, your entire being comes alive. Your attention sharpens, your energy increases, your capacity for presence expands. You become the listener others seek when they need to be truly heard, the companion others treasure when they want to explore ideas that matter. But when conversations remain trapped in the safe shallows of social convention, your energy contracts, your attention wanders, your presence diminishes. This is not rudeness but authenticity, your psyche's honest response to exchanges that feel disconnected from what makes human interaction genuine and nourishing. The challenge this creates in a culture addicted to surface pleasantries cannot be underestimated. Most social and professional environments operate on the assumption that small talk serves essential functions: breaking ice, establishing rapport, maintaining social cohesion, demonstrating normalcy. Your difficulty with these conversational rituals can be interpreted as unfriendliness, arrogance, social anxiety, or even pathology. But the deeper truth is that your struggle with small talk reflects a more sophisticated understanding of what genuine connection requires. While others may find comfort in the predictable rhythms of surface exchange, you recognize that these same rhythms can actually prevent the deeper connections they appear to facilitate. Small talk can serve as a way of keeping others at a safe distance while maintaining the appearance of social engagement. Your discomfort with superficial conversation often reveals the shadow aspects of social niceness, the ways that polite interaction can become a form of mutual protection against authentic encounter. When conversations remain safely abstract or focused on external topics, no one has to risk revealing their actual thoughts, feelings, struggles, or longings. The comfort of small talk lies precisely in its capacity to create the feeling of connection without requiring the vulnerability that genuine intimacy demands. This recognition places you in a difficult position. You can sense the deeper longings that motivate small talk, the desire for connection, acceptance, belonging. But you also recognize how these very longings are often frustrated by the surface-level exchanges that seem designed to address them. You find yourself caught between compassion for others' need for social comfort and frustration with the mechanisms that prevent the very connection they seek. Learning to navigate this tension requires developing what might be called compassionate authenticity, the ability to honor both your need for depth and others' need for safety in social interaction. This doesn't mean forcing every conversation into existential territory or rejecting all forms of casual exchange. Instead, it means finding ways to bring presence and genuine interest, even to surface-level topics, looking for openings where deeper connection might naturally emerge. This skill involves recognizing that small talk, while often shallow, can sometimes serve as a doorway to more meaningful exchange. The key is learning to sense when someone's casual comment carries emotional weight, when their offhand observation reflects deeper concern, when their surface sharing invites more substantial response. You develop the ability to hear what others are not quite saying, to respond to the subtext beneath the text. But this compassionate navigation requires you to accept that most interactions will remain on the surface, and this limitation is not failure, but simply the reality of human social functioning. Not every conversation needs to explore the depths. Not every interaction must carry profound significance. Part of your development as a depth-oriented person involves learning to find meaning in the simple act of kind presence, even when conversations don't venture into territories that particularly nourish your soul. This acceptance doesn't mean betraying your authenticity, but rather expanding your understanding of what authenticity can include. Sometimes the most authentic response to someone's small talk is simple, warm attention to their attempt at connection, even if the content doesn't inspire you. Sometimes authenticity means recognizing that your need for depth in every interaction is itself a form of spiritual materialism that can prevent you from offering the simple gift of relaxed presence. The development of this more flexible authenticity often involves working with the shadow aspects of your struggle with small talk. This shadow can include spiritual pride, the unconscious sense of superiority over those who seem content with surface exchanges. It can manifest as social withdrawal, the tendency to avoid potentially meaningful connections because they might require navigating some superficial conversation first. It can express itself as critical judgment, the habit of dismissing others as shallow because they engage in forms of communication that don't match your preferences. Working with these shadow elements requires recognizing that your struggle with small talk, while genuine, can also become a defense against the vulnerability that all authentic connection requires. Sometimes the depth you seek in conversation is itself a way of controlling interaction, of ensuring that exchanges happen on your terms rather than risking the uncertainty of meeting others where they are. This recognition doesn't invalidate your authentic difficulty with superficial communication, but adds complexity to your understanding of it. Your challenge with small talk serves important functions, protecting your energy, maintaining your authenticity, guarding against the spiritual malnutrition that comes from too much surface exchange. But it can also become a barrier to the very connections you most deeply desire, if it prevents you from meeting others in the conversational spaces where they feel safe enough to eventually share more of themselves. The ultimate skill for the guardian of authenticity involves learning to discern when pushing toward depth serves genuine connection, and when accepting surface exchange actually creates more space for authenticity to emerge naturally. This discernment develops through experience, through careful attention to the results of different approaches, through growing sensitivity to others' capacity for depth in any given moment. Some people are ready for profound conversation immediately, hungry for the kind of meaningful exchange you naturally offer. Others need to feel safe through several surface interactions before they can risk more vulnerable sharing. Still others may never feel comfortable with the depths you inhabit, but they may offer other forms of connection, practical support, gentle presence, shared activities that have their own value even if they don't satisfy your need for intellectual or emotional intimacy. Learning to appreciate these different forms of connection, without demanding that all of them match your particular needs, represents a mature form of authenticity, one that honors both your depth and others' ways of being, without sacrificing either to false accommodation. Your struggle with small talk ultimately serves not only your individual development, but also a collective function. In a culture increasingly dominated by surface interactions, social media exchanges, networking conversations, transactional communications, your discomfort with superficiality serves as a reminder of what human beings actually need from each other, to be seen, heard, known, and valued for more than their social performances. This reminder doesn't always need to be explicit. Sometimes your simple refusal to engage in conversations that feel empty creates space for something real to emerge. Sometimes your obvious discomfort with superficial exchange gives others permission to share something more substantial. Sometimes your authentic response to casual sharing reveals depths in others that they didn't know they possessed. In serving as a guardian of authenticity, you protect not only your own need for meaningful connection, but also the collective awareness that human beings are far more interesting, complex, and beautiful than small talk suggests. Your struggle with surface conversation serves as a form of resistance against the cultural tendency to reduce human interaction to its most manageable and least threatening dimensions. This resistance is not mere stubbornness, but spiritual activism, the insistence that human beings deserve better from each other than polite pleasantries and performed normalcy. Your discomfort with small talk represents a vote for the possibility of genuine encounter, a stand for the recognition that every person carries depths worth exploring, mysteries worth honoring, stories worth hearing. The marketplace of shallow exchange will always exist, serving its functions of social lubrication and emotional safety. But your presence in that marketplace, uncomfortable as it may be for you, serves as a reminder that other possibilities exist, that human beings are capable of much more meaningful forms of connection than the surface exchanges that often pass for relationship in our disconnected age. Your struggle is not weakness but strength, not limitation but gift, not problem but calling. In a world hungry for authentic connection but afraid of the vulnerability it requires, you serve as both guardian and guide, protecting the possibility of depth while modeling what it looks like to risk genuine encounter with another human being. The soul that knows depth has walked through the valley where light seems extinguished and hope appears buried, emerging not unscathed but transformed, carrying within the wisdom that can only be earned through conscious suffering. There is a particular quality of strength that exists only in those who have been broken and reconstituted, who have descended into territories of despair so complete that return seemed impossible, yet who have somehow found their way back to the surface, carrying treasures that can only be gathered in the depths. This is the seventh sign of the deep soul. You have survived dark nights, not the ordinary difficulties that all humans face, but the profound psychological and spiritual crises that shatter identity, dissolve meaning, and strip away every familiar reference point, until nothing remains but the naked encounter with existence itself. These dark nights arrive in many forms. Perhaps yours came through the devastating loss of someone central to your world, a death that tore apart not just your happiness but your basic assumptions about how life works. Perhaps it manifested as a period of profound depression that descended like fog, obscuring every source of joy and meaning, until you could barely remember what it felt like to want to be alive. Perhaps it emerged through the collapse of dreams you had built your identity around, career paths that crumbled, relationships that disintegrated, beliefs that proved hollow when tested by reality. Or perhaps your dark night was more subtle but no less transformative, a gradual recognition that the life you had been living belonged to someone else, that you had been performing a role in a story you never consciously chose, the slow dawning that success in the external world had left you empty inside, that achievements others envied had brought you no lasting satisfaction, that you had climbed ladders only to discover they were leaning against walls you didn't want to scale. However it arrived, this period of profound disorientation shared certain characteristics that mark it as more than ordinary suffering. It involved not just pain, but the complete dissolution of the psychological structures that normally provide stability and meaning. It challenged not just your happiness but your fundamental sense of who you are, what life means, whether existence itself has purpose or value. Jung understood these experiences as manifestations of what he called enantiodromia, the tendency for psychological and spiritual development to proceed through the transformation of opposing forces into their apparent opposites. The dark night represents the necessary dissolution phase that must precede authentic rebirth, the psychological death that makes genuine resurrection possible. This process follows the archetypal pattern that appears throughout mythology and spiritual traditions as the death-rebirth cycle. The hero must descend into the underworld before claiming their true power. The shaman must undergo the dismemberment experience before developing healing abilities. The mystic must endure the dark night of the soul before achieving union with the divine. The phoenix must burn completely before rising from its ashes. Your survival of this archetypal journey marks you as one who has been initiated into depths that those who remain on the surface cannot imagine. This initiation was not chosen consciously. Few would volunteer for such experiences if they knew what was coming, but it was necessary for the development of the particular form of consciousness you are meant to embody, the specific gifts you are called to offer the world. The wisdom that emerges from surviving dark nights cannot be learned through books, courses, or theoretical study. It can only be earned through direct experience of psychological dissolution and reconstitution. This wisdom includes intimate knowledge of suffering without being destroyed by it, profound familiarity with despair that doesn't end in cynicism, deep acquaintance with loss that somehow generates greater capacity for love. This paradoxical transformation, the way that breakdown becomes breakthrough, that endings become beginnings, that deaths become births, reveals one of the most mysterious aspects of psychological and spiritual development. The very experiences that seem to destroy meaning actually create the space for more authentic meaning to emerge. The losses that appear to diminish you actually increase your capacity to appreciate what remains. The deaths you endure somehow generate new forms of life. But this transformation is not automatic. Many who experience profound suffering become trapped in victim consciousness, defining themselves by their wounds rather than their resilience. Others develop what might be called survivor amnesia, quickly forgetting the lessons of their dark nights once life returns to relative stability. Still others become addicted to the intensity of crisis, creating unnecessary drama because they have learned to equate depth with suffering. What distinguishes those who emerge from dark nights truly transformed is their ability to engage what Jung called conscious suffering, the capacity to remain present to pain without being consumed by it, to experience breakdown without losing connection to the possibility of breakthrough, to endure endings without closing their hearts to new beginnings. This conscious suffering requires enormous courage, because it involves resisting the natural impulse to escape pain through numbing, denial, or blame. It means staying awake in the midst of experiences that make sleep seem like the only sensible response. It demands maintaining some thread of connection to hope, even when hope appears completely irrational given current circumstances. The development of this capacity often involves what might be called sacred witnessing, learning to observe your own psychological process with compassion rather than judgment, with curiosity rather than resistance. This witnessing stance allows you to recognize the dark night as a natural phase in psychological development, rather than evidence of personal failure or cosmic punishment. From this perspective, the dark night becomes not just something to survive, but something to learn from, not just an ordeal to endure, but an initiation to receive. You begin to recognize that the intensity of your suffering often corresponds to the magnitude of the transformation trying to occur, that the depth of your dissolution reflects the height of the consciousness trying to emerge. This recognition doesn't eliminate the pain. Conscious suffering is still suffering, but it provides a context that makes the pain bearable, a framework that prevents despair from having the final word. You begin to sense that something larger than your personal will is working through these experiences, that your breakdown is actually the breakdown of psychological structures that were too small to contain who you are becoming. The phoenix archetype captures this process perfectly. The magnificent bird that must burn completely before it can rise again in even greater beauty and power. The phoenix doesn't choose its burning, doesn't understand why the fire must come, doesn't know during the conflagration that resurrection is possible. But the burning is not random destruction. It is the necessary process through which old forms are dissolved so that new forms can emerge. Your survival of dark nights places you in this lineage of phoenixes, those who have experienced the fire of transformation and emerged not diminished but enhanced, not weakened but strengthened, not closed but more open than before. This emergence carries with it particular gifts that can only be developed through the initiation of conscious suffering. One of these gifts is profound compassion for others who are walking through their own dark valleys. Having navigated the territory of despair personally, you can offer something to fellow travelers that those who have remained on sunny paths cannot provide: the credible assurance that survival is possible, that meaning can emerge from meaninglessness, that life can be rebuilt from the ashes of everything you thought you knew. This compassion is not theoretical, but embodied. Others can sense in your presence the reality of someone who has been broken and healed, who has lost everything and discovered something more valuable than anything that was lost. Your very existence serves as proof that dark nights can be survived, that phoenixes can rise, that transformation is possible even when it seems impossible. Another gift of dark night survival is what might be called spiritual resilience, the knowledge that you can endure far more than you thought possible and emerge stronger rather than bitter. This resilience is not mere toughness, but a profound flexibility born from having learned that identity is more fluid than the ego believes, that meaning is more resilient than circumstances suggest, that hope is more durable than despair assumes. This resilience manifests not as invulnerability, but as what could be called conscious vulnerability, the ability to remain open even after being wounded, to love even after experiencing loss, to trust even after betrayal. You have learned that protection often prevents the very connections and experiences that make life worth living, that the heart's greatest strength lies not in its armor, but in its willingness to keep opening despite the risks. Perhaps most significantly, your survival of dark nights develops what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing psychological forces in creative tension rather than being torn apart by them. You have learned to experience despair and hope simultaneously, to embrace loss while welcoming new beginnings, to honor endings while remaining open to unexpected resurrections. This capacity to hold paradox without demanding premature resolution marks you as someone who has been initiated into the deepest mysteries of psychological and spiritual development. You understand through lived experience that growth requires breakdown, that creation emerges from destruction, that the most profound transformations often feel like death before they reveal themselves as birth. But perhaps the greatest gift of surviving dark nights is the recognition that suffering, while never pleasant, is not meaningless. You have discovered that pain can be transformed into wisdom, that wounds can become sources of healing power, that the very experiences that seemed to destroy your life actually created space for a more authentic life to emerge. This doesn't mean glorifying suffering or seeking out painful experiences. It means recognizing that when suffering comes, as it inevitably does for all who dare to live deeply, it can serve purposes beyond mere endurance. It can burn away false identities, dissolve limiting beliefs, create openings for new possibilities, generate compassion for all who suffer, and reveal the indestructible essence that survives all temporal losses. Your dark nights were not punishment but preparation, not evidence of cosmic cruelty, but invitations to develop capacities that can only emerge through conscious engagement with difficulty. They were not random accidents, but necessary stages in your psychological and spiritual development, the particular initiations required for you to become who you are meant to be. The fact that you not only survived these experiences but emerged from them with your heart still open, your hope still alive, your capacity for love actually enhanced, marks you as someone who has been transformed by fire rather than consumed by it. You carry within your being the living proof that phoenixes are not mythological creatures, but psychological realities, that human consciousness has the miraculous capacity to die and be reborn, to burn and rise again, to transform the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom. This transformation serves not only your individual development, but also the collective need for models of conscious resilience in a culture that often tries to medicate away darkness rather than learn from it, that seeks to avoid suffering rather than discover its transformative potential. Your survival serves as a beacon for others who are currently walking through their own dark valleys. Your very presence in the world demonstrates that dark nights can be not just survived, but transformed into sources of strength, wisdom, and compassion. You serve as living evidence that the human spirit is more resilient than circumstances suggest, that meaning can emerge from meaninglessness, that love is stronger than loss. The phoenix of transformation that you have become carries within its wings the fire of authentic wisdom, not the theoretical knowledge that comes from study, but the experiential understanding that emerges from having been broken and reformed, dissolved and reconstituted, buried and resurrected. This wisdom is one of the most precious gifts you have to offer, a world that desperately needs to know that transformation is possible, that dark nights can be survived, that phoenixes do rise from ashes to soar again. In your bones lives the memory of truth beyond human construction, a knowing that recognizes the difference between authentic authority and the hollow commands of systems built on collective sleep, marking you as one who serves a higher order than social approval. There is a particular form of inner restlessness that stirs in those whose souls remember their allegiance to something larger than human institutions, a restlessness that manifests not as rebellion for its own sake, but as an inability to submit to authority that has not earned legitimacy through wisdom, compassion, and genuine service to human flourishing. This is the eighth and final sign of the deep soul. You question authority and convention, not from adolescent defiance or anarchistic impulse, but from a profound recognition that true authority comes not from position or power, but from alignment with principles that transcend human ego and social construction. This questioning begins early, often in childhood, as an instinctive resistance to commands that seem arbitrary, rules that appear to serve no genuine purpose, authorities who demand obedience without demonstrating wisdom. While other children seemed naturally inclined to follow adult directions without question, you found yourself asking why, not to be difficult, but because something in you needed to understand the logic, the purpose, the deeper reason behind external expectations. Your teachers may have found you challenging. The student who questioned not just the answers but the assumptions underlying the questions, who wanted to know not just what to think but why certain thoughts were considered more valuable than others. Your parents may have struggled with your apparent inability to just do what you're told, not understanding that your resistance came not from disrespect but from a deeper respect for truth that refused to be satisfied with explanations that felt incomplete or inauthentic. This questioning nature often created difficulties in institutional settings designed to operate through unexamined compliance, schools that rewarded conformity over creativity, workplaces that valued obedience over innovation, religious organizations that demanded faith without encouraging inquiry. All of these environments felt spiritually claustrophobic to your naturally questioning consciousness. But what others interpreted as problematic behavior was actually the expression of what Jung understood as the individuating psyche, the soul's natural drive toward authentic selfhood, rather than collective conformity. Your questioning represented not rebellion against all authority, but discrimination between authentic and inauthentic forms of power, between leadership that serves human development and control that serves only its own perpetuation. Jung recognized that healthy psychological development requires what he called differentiation from the collective, the gradual separation of individual consciousness from the undifferentiated mass of social expectations and inherited beliefs. This differentiation doesn't mean rejecting all external guidance, but rather developing the capacity to evaluate such guidance through the filter of inner wisdom, rather than accepting it blindly based on external pressure. Your natural tendency to question authority serves this individuating function. Each time you ask, but why should we do it this way? Or what if there's a better approach? Or who decided this was the right answer? You are exercising the psychological muscle of discrimination, strengthening your capacity to think independently while remaining open to genuine wisdom, regardless of its source. This discrimination is crucial because authority comes in many forms, some legitimate and some false. Authentic authority emerges from demonstrated wisdom, lived experience, and genuine care for those being served. It invites questions because it has nothing to hide, welcomes challenge because it grows stronger through examination, encourages independent thinking because its goal is the development of consciousness rather than the maintenance of control. False authority, by contrast, demands and questioning obedience, discourages inquiry, punishes independent thinking, and serves primarily its own preservation, rather than the growth of those under its influence. Your questioning nature serves as a natural detector for this difference, creating discomfort in the presence of inauthentic power, while recognizing and honoring genuine wisdom wherever it appears. This capacity for discrimination places you in the archetypal lineage of what might be called the sacred rebel, those who serve truth rather than convention, who answer to conscience rather than compliance, who recognize that the highest form of respect for genuine authority is the refusal to grant the same respect to its false counterparts. Throughout history, this archetype has appeared as prophets who challenged corrupt religious institutions, philosophers who questioned prevailing worldviews, scientists who overturned accepted paradigms, artists who refused to conform to aesthetic conventions, social reformers who insisted that the way things are need not be the way things must be, Jesus questioning the religious authorities of his time, Socrates challenging the assumptions of Athenian society, Galileo insisting on truth that contradicted official doctrine, Gandhi refusing to submit to unjust laws. These figures weren't rebels in the destructive sense, but sacred rebels who served higher principles than social approval. deeper truths than conventional wisdom. Your questioning places you in this tradition, whether you recognize it or not. When you challenge workplace policies that seem to serve bureaucracy rather than human beings, when you question educational approaches that prioritize standardization over individual development, when you resist social pressures that demand conformity at the expense of authenticity, you are serving the same function that sacred rebels have always served, keeping alive the possibility of growth, change, and genuine progress. But this service comes with significant costs. The sacred rebel often experiences what Jung called the problem of the opposites, the tension between loyalty to inner truth and the need for social belonging, between the call to authenticity and the pressure to conform, between individual conscience and collective expectations. This tension is not abstract but intensely personal. Your questioning may cost you jobs, relationships, social acceptance, even family harmony. Others may interpret your inability to go along to get along as arrogance, your insistence on examining assumptions as troublemaking, your refusal to accept inadequate explanations as disrespect for authority. But the deeper truth is that your questioning emerges not from disrespect for authority, but from profound respect for what authority could be, leadership that actually leads toward truth, rather than away from it, power that serves genuine human flourishing, rather than its own perpetuation, institutions that evolve, rather than ossify, systems that remain open to improvement, rather than defending their limitations. This vision of authentic authority creates both the pain and the purpose of your questioning nature. The pain comes from recognizing how far current realities fall short of these possibilities. The purpose comes from serving, through your questions, the emergence of more authentic forms of leadership, more conscious institutions, more evolved systems of human organization. Your questioning serves several crucial functions in this evolutionary process. First, it serves as a form of quality control, making it difficult for inauthentic authority to maintain its power through unexamined assumptions. When you ask uncomfortable questions, you force systems to either improve themselves or reveal their inadequacies more clearly. Second, your questioning creates space for new possibilities to emerge. By refusing to accept "that's just how things are done" as a sufficient explanation, you keep alive the recognition that alternatives exist, that current methods are choices rather than inevitabilities, that improvement is possible if we're willing to examine and modify our approaches. Third, your questioning serves an educational function, not just for yourself, but for others who may have accepted current realities without examination. When you voice questions that others have felt but not expressed, you give permission for collective inquiry, for shared exploration of possibilities that individual conformity would have prevented. But perhaps most importantly, your questioning serves what might be called a consciousness-raising function, helping to elevate the level of awareness within systems and institutions. By refusing to participate unconsciously in their operations, your questions force collective attention to assumptions that would otherwise remain invisible, patterns that would otherwise continue unexamined. This consciousness-raising function requires tremendous courage because it often makes you the target of defensive reactions from those who have investments in maintaining current systems unchanged. Your questions can feel threatening to those whose identity or security depends on existing structures, whose power derives from unexamined assumptions, whose comfort comes from predictable routines. Working with this shadow requires developing what might be called skillful rebellion, the ability to question and challenge in ways that serve growth rather than mere destruction, that invite examination rather than provoke defensive reactions, that open possibilities rather than simply closing down current realities. This skillfulness involves learning to distinguish between occasions when direct challenge serves consciousness and occasions when more subtle inquiry might be more effective. It means developing the capacity to question systems while maintaining compassion for the individuals who operate within them, recognizing that most people are doing their best within the limitations of the structures they've inherited. It also involves examining your own motivations for questioning, distinguishing between inquiry that serves genuine truth-seeking and questioning that serves ego gratification, between challenges that invite growth and those that simply express frustration or superiority. The sacred rebel must be willing to question their own questioning to ensure that their rebellious impulses serve higher purposes rather than merely personal preferences. This self-examination is crucial, because the shadow of the sacred rebel can manifest as what Jung called inflation, the unconscious identification with archetypal energy that leads to grandiosity, self-righteousness, and the belief that one's personal opinions carry cosmic significance. The healthy rebel questions not only external authority, but also the authority of their own ego, remaining humble before the mystery of what genuine truth requires. Over time, you may notice that your questioning develops certain patterns, focuses on particular types of authority, challenges specific kinds of assumptions. These patterns reveal something important about your individual path of development and service. Some sacred rebels are particularly attuned to questioning intellectual authority, challenging academic orthodoxies, scientific paradigms, or educational assumptions. Others focus on social or political authority, examining governmental policies, cultural norms, or institutional practices. Still others are drawn to question spiritual or religious authority, exploring the assumptions of organized religion, the claims of spiritual teachers, or the conventions of mystical practice. Your particular focus reflects not arbitrary preference but genuine aspects of your psychological and spiritual nature, indicating the specific ways that your consciousness is meant to serve the collective evolution of human understanding. The ultimate purpose of sacred rebellion extends beyond individual authenticity to collective awakening. In a world where many systems operate through unconscious compliance rather than conscious participation, your questioning serves as a catalyst for the development of more conscious forms of human organization, institutions that can examine themselves, leadership that welcomes challenge, authority that grows stronger through honest inquiry rather than weaker through defensive protection. This service doesn't require you to become a political activist or professional revolutionary. It can be fulfilled through the simple commitment to living consciously within whatever systems you encounter, asking thoughtful questions, refusing to participate unconsciously, insisting that policies and practices be examined rather than simply inherited, maintaining your capacity for independent thought while remaining open to genuine wisdom from any source. Your questioning nature represents a form of love. Love for human potential, love for truth, love for the possibility that we can do better than we currently do. It emerges not from cynicism about current realities, but from faith in future possibilities, not from hatred of authority, but from vision of what authentic leadership could become. In serving as a sacred rebel, you participate in the ancient and ongoing work of consciousness itself, the gradual liberation of human awareness from unconscious patterns, limiting beliefs, and inherited assumptions that no longer serve our highest development. Your questions serve as instruments of this liberation, tools for dissolving the crystallized structures that prevent growth and creating openings through which new possibilities can emerge. The memory that lives in your bones, the recognition of truth beyond human construction, is not personal, but transpersonal, not individual, but archetypal. It connects you to the timeless function of those who serve not human institutions, but the principles that could make human institutions truly worthy of respect. In following this inner authority rather than external pressure, you demonstrate that genuine obedience serves not power but truth, not control but consciousness, not conformity but the authentic authority that emerges when human beings align themselves with purposes larger than their own ego or survival. Your questioning is not opposition but proposition, an invitation to evolve, to grow, to become more conscious, to develop more authentic forms of authority and more wisdom-based institutions. In a world desperately needing conscious leadership and evolved systems of human organization, your sacred rebellion serves as both catalyst and compass, challenging what is while pointing toward what could be. Having recognized the signs, you stand at the threshold between the world you once knew and the one you're becoming, understanding that depth is not a burden but a birthright, a call to inhabit the fullness of your psychological inheritance. Now that the 8 signs have revealed themselves, like constellations emerging in a darkening sky, you can begin to see the larger pattern they form together, the coherent landscape of consciousness that your depth-oriented nature inhabits. These are not isolated traits, but interconnected aspects of a unified psychological and spiritual orientation, each sign supporting and deepening the others, in a symphony of authentic being that has been trying to express itself through you since birth. The feeling of being an outsider that marked your earliest recognition of difference has led you to the craving for solitude that protects and nourishes your sensitive nature. This solitude has created the space necessary for the deep questioning that refuses to accept surface explanations. Your questioning has refined your capacity to feel others' pain with such intensity because it has made you aware of the suffering that superficial answers create. This empathic sensitivity has sharpened your ability to see patterns others miss because pain often reveals connections that comfort obscures. Your pattern recognition has made small talk feel increasingly hollow because you can perceive the deeper hungers that casual conversation fails to address. These accumulated sensitivities have likely drawn you into dark nights of the soul where your assumptions were dissolved and your identity reconstituted. And through these experiences of breakdown and reconstruction, you have developed the sacred rebel's capacity to distinguish authentic from inauthentic authority, genuine wisdom from inherited assumption. This is not a random collection of challenging traits, but a coherent constellation of gifts that work together to create what Jung would recognize as an individuated consciousness, a psyche that has differentiated itself from collective unconsciousness and developed its own unique relationship to the deeper dimensions of existence. Each sign has prepared you for the others. Each challenge has developed capacities you needed for the next phase of your unfolding. Understanding this interconnectedness transforms your relationship to what may have felt like a collection of problems or limitations. You begin to see that your otherness was not a flaw to be corrected, but the first signal of a different kind of consciousness trying to emerge. Your need for solitude was not antisocial behavior, but the requirement for the inner work that your particular form of awareness demands. Your uncomfortable questions were not troublemaking, but the operation of a mind designed to probe beyond accepted boundaries. Your deep empathy was not oversensitivity, but a refined capacity for emotional perception that serves important functions. Your pattern recognition was not overthinking, but a form of intelligence that perceives connections beneath surface appearances. Your struggle with small talk was not social inadequacy, but spiritual discernment that recognizes the difference between authentic and performative communication. Your dark nights were not evidence of weakness, but the necessary initiations that develop wisdom and resilience. Your questioning of authority was not rebellious defiance, but discrimination in service of higher principles. This reframing represents what Jung called a shift in attitude, a fundamental change in how you understand and relate to your own psychological nature. Instead of seeing your depth orientation as a collection of problems to be solved, you begin to recognize it as a coherent calling to be fulfilled. Instead of trying to fix what seems wrong with you, you start to develop what is uniquely right about you. This shift is not mere positive thinking, but accurate perception. The qualities that make you feel different from the majority are not random mutations, but specialized psychological functions that serve important purposes both for your individual development and for the collective evolution of consciousness. You are not broken. You are specialized. You are not dysfunctional. You serve a different function than those oriented towards surface living. Jung understood this specialization through his work with psychological types and the process of individuation. He recognized that consciousness evolves not through uniform development, but through differentiation, the emergence of specialized forms of awareness that can perceive and process aspects of reality that remain invisible to more generalized consciousness. Your depth orientation represents one such specialization, a form of psychological evolution. that creates capacity for perceiving and working with dimensions of experience that surface consciousness cannot access. This evolutionary perspective helps explain why depth-oriented individuals often feel like outsiders in surface-oriented cultures. You are not failures at normal human functioning, but representatives of emerging human potential, carriers of consciousness that points toward possibilities most people are not yet ready to recognize or develop. Your apparent maladjustment to current cultural norms reflects not personal inadequacy, but cultural limitations. The inability of surface-oriented systems to recognize and support the development of depth-oriented consciousness. This recognition carries both validation and responsibility. The validation comes from understanding that your struggles are not evidence of personal failure, but signs of a consciousness trying to evolve beyond current cultural limitations. The responsibility comes from recognizing that your development serves not only your individual fulfillment, but the collective need for more conscious, compassionate, and wise approaches to human existence. But this responsibility must be held lightly, without the inflation that comes from identifying too closely with archetypal significance. Yes, your consciousness carries evolutionary potential, but so does every human being when it is allowed to develop authentically. Yes, your depth serves collective needs, but it does so primarily through your individual fulfillment, rather than through grandiose attempts to save or enlighten others. The landscape of the awakened soul is not a territory of superiority, but of service, not a realm of special privilege, but of particular responsibility. Your gifts are not possessions to be hoarded, but functions to be exercised. Not achievements to be displayed, but capacities to be developed and offered wherever they can serve authentic growth and healing. Understanding the interconnected nature of your psychological landscape also reveals why attempts to modify or eliminate individual signs often fail or create new problems. You cannot simply choose to be less sensitive to others' emotions without losing some of your capacity for pattern recognition. You cannot force yourself to enjoy small talk without dulling the discernment that protects your need for authentic communication. You cannot eliminate your questioning nature without losing access to the insights that emerge from your willingness to probe beneath surface explanations. These aspects of your consciousness form what systems theorists would call an emergent property, a coherent pattern that arises from the interaction of multiple elements, and cannot be understood by examining any single element in isolation. Your depth orientation is not the sum of 8 separate traits, but a unified way of being that expresses itself through these various manifestations. This systemic understanding suggests that the goal is not to fix individual aspects of your nature, but to optimize the whole system, to find ways of living that honor and support all dimensions of your consciousness, while developing the skills needed to navigate a world that often doesn't understand or appreciate depth-oriented awareness. This optimization requires what might be called ecological thinking, understanding how your various psychological needs and capacities interact with each other and with your environment. Just as a plant needs certain conditions of soil, water, light, and temperature to thrive, your consciousness requires specific psychological and social conditions to flourish. Learning to identify and create these conditions becomes a crucial life skill. For the depth-oriented soul, these optimal conditions typically include sufficient solitude for reflection and integration, relationships with others who appreciate and can engage with your particular gifts, work that utilizes your capacities for deep thinking and authentic communication, environments that support rather than assault your sensitivity, and communities that value wisdom and authenticity over conformity and performance. Creating these conditions is not selfish, but necessary, not just for your personal well-being, but for your ability to offer your gifts effectively. A depth-oriented person trying to function in conditions that don't support their nature is like a musician trying to perform with a damaged instrument. The music that could emerge remains trapped inside, unable to find authentic expression. But creating optimal conditions doesn't mean avoiding all challenge or discomfort. The depth-oriented consciousness actually requires certain kinds of difficulty to develop its full potential. The tension between inner knowing and outer expectation serves the transcendent function. The friction between your authentic nature and social pressures generates the energy needed for individuation. The challenge of living consciously in an unconscious world develops the skills of discernment and skillful action that mature wisdom requires. The key is learning to distinguish between challenges that serve your development and those that merely drain your resources, between difficulties that strengthen your capacities and those that overwhelm your system. This discrimination develops through experience, through careful attention to which situations leave you depleted versus energized, which relationships support versus diminish your authentic expression, which environments enhance versus compromise your natural gifts. This experiential learning process is itself part of the landscape of awakened consciousness. You become increasingly skilled at reading your own psychological and spiritual weather, at recognizing the signs that indicate when you need more solitude or more connection, when you need to push beyond comfort zones or when you need to retreat and regenerate, when your questioning serves genuine inquiry or when it reflects defensive intellectualization. This self-knowledge is not narcissistic but practical, the foundation for a life lived in alignment with your authentic nature, rather than in reaction to external pressures. As you develop this intimate familiarity with your own psychological landscape, you become better able to make choices that support rather than sabotage your natural development, that honor rather than betray your essential nature. The awakened soul learns to inhabit its own landscape consciously rather than apologetically, to tend its psychological garden with the same care that a master gardener brings to cultivating rare and precious plants. This cultivation involves not forcing artificial growth, but creating conditions that allow natural unfolding, not eliminating all difficulty, but providing the support needed to transform challenge into wisdom. Over time, this conscious cultivation creates what might be called psychological sustainability, the ability to maintain your depth-oriented functioning over the long term, without burnout, overwhelm, or the need to retreat permanently from engagement with the world. You develop resilience, not through toughening your sensitivities, but through learning to work with them skillfully, not through eliminating your need for depth, but through becoming more efficient at accessing it. This sustainability makes possible what is perhaps the greatest gift of the awakened soul, the capacity to serve as a bridge between worlds, to translate depth, insights into forms that can be received by surface consciousness, to demonstrate through lived example that it is possible to inhabit authenticity without losing the ability to function effectively in practical reality. This bridging function represents the mature expression of depth-oriented consciousness, not withdrawal into isolated authenticity, but skillful engagement that brings the gifts of depth into dialogue with the needs of the surface world. You become someone who can speak both languages, who can move fluidly between contemplative solitude and engaged action, who can honor both inner wisdom and outer responsibility. The landscape of the awakened soul is ultimately not a private territory but a public service, not a place to hide from the world, but a vantage point from which to serve it more consciously. From the peaks of your hard-won awareness, you can see patterns and possibilities that remain invisible to those trapped in the valleys of surface existence. Your role becomes not to judge their blindness, but to offer what sight you have gained through your willingness to climb the difficult paths of authentic development. This offering happens not through preaching or teaching, but through presence, through the quality of consciousness you bring to whatever roles you play, whatever relationships you inhabit, whatever work you undertake. Your depth becomes a gift to others, not when you insist they recognize it, but when you embody it, so naturally that it invites their own deepening, so authentically that it gives them permission to explore their own depths. Standing at this threshold between recognition and integration, you can begin to see that the journey of the deep soul has really just begun. Identifying the signs was only the first phase, the necessary recognition of what you carry. Now comes the lifelong work of learning to inhabit this consciousness skillfully, to develop its gifts consciously, to offer its service wisely, to live its truth boldly, while remaining humble before the mystery that consciousness itself represents. The landscape of the awakened soul stretches out before you now, no longer foreign territory but recognized homeland. You belong here, in these depths that once seemed like exile but now reveal themselves as destination. The signs that once marked you as an outsider now serve as compass points for the authentic life that has been waiting for you to claim it. There comes a moment in the soul's long journey when the world turns, as if by some cosmic hand, and suddenly sees what it had been blind to before. The very qualities that once made you invisible, that rendered you suspect or strange, now shine with a light that others cannot help but notice. Recognition arrives like dawn breaking over a landscape that has been shrouded in darkness for so long that you had almost forgotten what illumination looked like. But here, in this moment of vindication, the soul faces perhaps its most treacherous passage, for recognition, when it comes after long years of misunderstanding, carries with it a terrible weight. The accumulated sediment of all those moments when you were dismissed, overlooked, or actively rejected. The ego, wounded and scarred from its battles with an uncomprehending world, rises up with a list of grievances as long as winter nights. It whispers seductively of justice, of the sweetness of being proven right, of the satisfaction that should come from watching those who failed to see you scramble to make amends. This is the moment when the lead of rejection must be transformed into the gold of compassion, when the alchemical fires of the soul are tested most severely. For it is one thing to maintain your integrity when you are alone in your knowing. It is quite another to hold on to your humanity when vindication threatens to harden you into righteous stone. The recognition that comes to those who have walked the path of authentic being rarely arrives cleanly. It is not a simple reversal where those who rejected you suddenly understand and apologize. Instead, it comes wrapped in complexity, tinged with the very human tendency of others to rewrite history, to claim they always knew, always saw something special in you. It arrives through the mouths of those who once ignored your contributions, now eager to associate themselves with your success. It appears in the form of opportunities that would have changed everything had they been offered years before when you needed them most. And in these moments, the shadow rises, all the buried resentment, all the carefully contained anger at a world that was too small, too frightened, too conventional to recognize what you offered. It all surfaces like oil from a ruptured well, threatening to contaminate the very recognition you have waited so long to receive. The temptation is enormous to let bitterness be your companion, to wear your vindication like armor, to make others pay for their previous blindness. But Jung understood that this moment is not about them. It is about you. It is about whether the years of walking alone have made you wise or merely wounded, whether your time in the wilderness has purified your spirit or poisoned it with accumulated grievance. The soul that has truly individuated recognizes that even misjudgment, even rejection, served a purpose in the great becoming. Every closed door forced you to develop your own keys. Every misunderstanding deepened your understanding of yourself. Every dismissal strengthened your connection to your own inner knowing. The alchemy of vindication requires you to see that those who failed to recognize you were not villains in your story, but unconscious participants in your individuation. They were playing their necessary roles in the grand drama of your becoming, their resistance creating the very pressure that transformed your coal into diamond. To hate them now for their blindness would be like cursing the darkness for teaching you to kindle your own light. This does not mean you must embrace those who wounded you with naive forgiveness, or pretend that their actions caused no pain. The integration of shadow demands absolute honesty about what was experienced, felt, and endured. You must allow yourself to feel the full weight of what it cost to be misunderstood, to be passed over, to have your gifts dismissed or your insights ignored. This grief is sacred. It is the price of being ahead of your time, of seeing what others could not yet perceive. But from this honest acknowledgement of pain must come something greater than bitterness. The soul that has been refined by years of walking its own path develops a capacity for a kind of cosmic perspective, an ability to see the larger pattern in which even suffering serves growth. You begin to understand that those who rejected you were often rejecting something in themselves, some call to authenticity, some invitation to depth, some challenge to their own comfortable unconsciousness that your very presence represented. The person who lives differently, who thinks differently, who creates from an uncommon place, inevitably becomes a mirror in which others see their own unlived possibilities. And mirrors, Jung knew, are often shattered by those who cannot bear what they reveal. Your vindication, then, becomes not a moment of triumph over others, but a recognition of the human struggle between consciousness and unconsciousness, between growth and safety, between the known and the mysterious. There is a profound spiritual principle at work here. That which we judge in others is often that which we fear in ourselves. Those who dismissed your unconventional wisdom may have been protecting themselves from the unsettling recognition that conventional wisdom is often shallow. Those who labeled your depth as darkness may have been fleeing from their own unexamined shadows. Those who called your authenticity selfish may have been defending against their own terror of living truthfully. When you can see this clearly, vindication transforms from a weapon into a gift. You realize that your recognition is not just about you. It is about the evolution of consciousness itself, your willingness to be misunderstood, to endure the loneliness of walking an uncommon path, has created space for others to eventually follow. Your refusal to compromise your essential nature, even when it cost you dearly, has made it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. This perspective allows for a kind of forgiveness that is not weakness, but strength. Not the forgiveness that enables unconscious behavior to continue unchallenged, but the forgiveness that recognizes the deep unconsciousness from which judgment and rejection arise. It is the forgiveness that sees those who hurt you not as evil but as asleep, not as enemies but as fellow souls struggling with their own limitations and fears. The process of this alchemical transformation is not quick or simple. It requires what Jung called active imagination, the conscious engagement with the images, emotions, and energies that arise around your experiences of rejection and recognition. You must sit with your anger, dialogue with your resentment, understand the legitimate needs and wounds that lie beneath your desire for vindication. You might imagine conversations with those who dismissed you, allowing both your fury and their unconscious motivations to be fully expressed in the safe space of your inner world. You might visualize yourself as an alchemist, placing the lead of your grievances into the transformative fire of understanding, watching as it slowly transmutes into the gold of wisdom and compassion. Through this inner work, you discover that your suffering was not meaningless. It was initiatory. Every moment of being misunderstood was teaching you to understand yourself more deeply. Every experience of rejection was showing you how to develop an unshakable connection to your own value. Every period of isolation was preparing you to stand in your truth, regardless of external validation. And perhaps most importantly, you learn that recognition, when it finally comes, is sweet, not because it proves others wrong, but because it confirms what you always knew in your deepest heart, that authenticity, however costly, however challenging, however lonely, is the only path to genuine fulfillment. The vindication you receive from the world becomes less important than the vindication you have already given yourself through years of faithful self-honor. There is a moment in every authentic soul's journey when they realize that they no longer need others to see them clearly in order to know their own worth. This realization often comes just before or just as external recognition begins to arrive, as if the universe waits for your independence from its approval before offering it freely. When you reach this place, vindication becomes not a settling of scores, but a celebration of what is possible when someone refuses to betray their essential nature. Your recognition becomes a beacon for others who are still struggling in the darkness of misunderstanding, still wondering if their own unusual gifts have any value in a world that seems to reward only the conventional. And in this way, even your vindication becomes an act of service. Not because you preach or teach or explicitly guide others, but because your very existence proves that it is possible to survive the wilderness of being different, to emerge not bitter but compassionate, not hardened but refined, not victorious over others but integrated within yourself. The deepest alchemy happens when you realize that your vindication was never really about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving something to yourself. that you could remain true to your nature even when it cost you everything, that you could transform the lead of suffering into the gold of wisdom, that you could forgive not just others but yourself, for all the ways you doubted your own path when the world's recognition was absent. This is the final test of individuation. Whether you can hold your recognition lightly, whether you can be grateful for it without being dependent on it, whether you can use it as a platform for continued growth rather than a stopping point of achievement. The soul that passes this test becomes truly free, free from the need for vindication, free from the burden of resentment, free to live and create and love from a place of such inner fullness that the approval or disapproval of others becomes merely weather passing through the sky of consciousness. In this freedom, you discover that your greatest vindication was never the world's recognition of your worth. It was your own recognition of the world's worth, despite its blindness, despite its resistance, despite its tendency to fear what it cannot immediately understand. This is the gold that emerges from the alchemical fire, a heart so refined by its own journey that it can look upon even those who caused it pain with something approaching love, knowing that they too are souls struggling toward the light, even if they must first travel through the long darkness of their own unconsciousness. And so we arrive at the final station of this long journey, the place where all paths converge into a single, luminous understanding, that the deepest freedom is not the freedom to be understood by others, but the freedom to understand yourself, so completely that the opinions, judgments, and perceptions of the external world become like weather patterns moving through your inner sky, acknowledged, perhaps even appreciated, for their temporary beauty or drama, but never mistaken for the permanent landscape of your being. This is the return that Jung spoke of, not a return to where you began, but a return to yourself with such profound recognition that the place itself is transformed. You are no longer the person who set out seeking recognition, validation, or understanding from a world that seemed perpetually blind to your true nature. You have become something far more precious, a human being who has learned to see themselves with the clarity that you once desperately wanted others to possess. The soul that has integrated the 5 traits, the tendency toward introversion, the gift of high sensitivity, the capacity for original thought, the pull toward unconventional life choices, and the willingness to challenge established norms, no longer experiences these qualities as burdens to be explained or justified. They have become the very instruments of your individuation, the tools through which you have carved out a life that reflects not what others expect or approve of, but what your deepest self knows to be true. Living your truth regardless of recognition is not a state of defiant independence or bitter isolation. It is something far more subtle and powerful. It is the establishment of an internal validation system so robust, so deeply rooted in genuine self-knowledge, that external approval becomes a pleasant bonus rather than a psychological necessity. You have learned to be your own good parent, your own wise teacher, your own faithful friend, not because you are narcissistic or self-absorbed, but because you have finally understood that no one else can give you the permission to be yourself. This internal validation system is not built on delusion or self-deception. It is not the ego's desperate attempt to avoid criticism by declaring itself perfect or beyond reproach. Rather, it is built on the bedrock of honest self-assessment, deep shadow work, and the integration of all aspects of your personality, both light and dark, both comfortable and challenging. You have learned to see yourself with the same compassionate clarity that you once hoped others would bring to their perception of you. The person who has achieved this level of inner authority moves through the world with a quality that others immediately sense, even if they cannot name it. There is a stillness about them, a centeredness that does not depend on external circumstances for its maintenance. They may still feel hurt when misunderstood, still experience disappointment when their contributions are overlooked, still know the sting of rejection, but these experiences no longer threaten the foundation of their self-worth. This is because they have learned the most essential lesson of individuation, that your value as a human being is not determined by others' capacity to recognize it. Your worth exists independently of external validation, just as the sun's light exists independently of whether clouds obscure it from view. The clouds may block the light temporarily, but they cannot diminish its essential radiance. When you live from this understanding, something remarkable happens. You become a beacon for others who are still struggling with the need for external approval, not through preaching or teaching or explicitly guiding, but through the simple fact of your existence as a person who has learned to validate themselves. Your very presence in the world becomes a kind of permission slip for others to explore their own authenticity. People sense that you are not performing for their approval, not modifying your behavior to earn their acceptance, not shape-shifting to meet their expectations. This can be initially unsettling for those who are accustomed to relationships based on mutual validation and reciprocal ego-stroking. But for those who are ready, your example becomes a doorway into their own possibility of genuine selfhood. The paradox of this stage is that the less you need recognition, the more likely you are to receive it. When you stop performing your worth for others, your authentic gifts can finally shine through clearly. When you cease the exhausting work of trying to convince others of your value, your actual value becomes evident to those who have eyes to see. When you release your attachment to being understood, you often find that understanding comes naturally to those who are capable of it. But by this point, the recognition feels different. It is no longer the desperate validation you once sought, but rather a pleasant confirmation of what you already know about yourself. It cannot inflate your ego because you have learned that your ego is just one small part of a much larger self. It cannot devastate you when it is withdrawn because you are no longer dependent on it for your sense of identity or worth. This stage of development requires a profound shift in how you relate to the collective unconscious, the shared pool of human assumptions, expectations, and conventional wisdom that once felt so threatening to your individuality. You begin to see the collective not as an enemy to be fought or a standard to be met, but as a vast ocean of human experience in which you are but one unique drop. Your difference from the mainstream is no longer a source of anxiety or defiance, but simply a fact of your existence, as natural and unremarkable as your height or the color of your eyes. You understand that diversity is not just tolerated in the grand scheme of consciousness evolution. It is essential. Your particular way of being, thinking, feeling, and creating adds something irreplaceable to the human tapestry. From this perspective, you can finally appreciate the role that even your critics and misunderstanders have played in your development. Their resistance forced you to develop stronger inner resources. Their blindness to your gifts taught you to value those gifts independently of external recognition. Their inability to understand your choices helped you develop an unshakable commitment to your own path. You begin to see that the universe, in its infinite wisdom, has been conspiring all along to help you become who you were meant to be. Every closed door led you to the right open one. Every misunderstanding deepened your understanding of yourself. Every period of isolation prepared you for the kind of authentic connection that is only possible between two people who have learned to be genuinely themselves. This does not mean you become passive or indifferent to the world around you. The individuated soul often becomes more engaged with life, not less, but from a fundamentally different place. You engage not from neediness or the desire to prove yourself, but from fullness and the natural overflow of a life lived in alignment with its deepest truth. Your creative work, whatever form it takes, emerges from this place of inner fullness rather than outer seeking. You write, paint, think, build, heal, teach, or love not because you hope others will finally recognize your worth, but because these activities are the natural expression of your authentic being. The work becomes pure in a way it never could when it was motivated by the need for validation. Your relationships, too, transform. You find yourself naturally gravitating toward others who have done their own inner work, who can meet you in the space of genuine authenticity. The superficial connections that once frustrated you begin to fall away, not through rejection or judgment, but through the simple law of resonance. Like calls to like, and your commitment to truth naturally attracts others who share that commitment. But perhaps most importantly, You develop a capacity for what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. You can hold both your individuality and your connection to humanity. You can honor both your need for solitude and your desire for meaningful relationship. You can embrace both your unconventional wisdom and your appreciation for valuable traditions. You can maintain both your commitment to personal truth and your compassion for those who are still struggling to find their own. This capacity to hold paradox without needing to resolve it into neat categories is one of the hallmarks of psychological maturity. It allows you to live comfortably with the mystery of your own existence, to be at peace with questions that have no easy answers, to find meaning in the journey itself, rather than in any particular destination. The person who has reached this level of integration becomes a bridge between worlds, the world of conventional understanding and the world of deeper truth, the world of collective consciousness and the world of individual realization, the world of external achievement and the world of inner fulfillment. They can speak both languages, move in both realms, serve both needs without losing their essential integrity. This service becomes effortless because it flows from being rather than doing. You do not set out to help others find their authenticity. Rather, your authentic being naturally evokes authenticity in others. You do not try to teach people to trust themselves. Your own self-trust becomes a living invitation for them to explore their own inner knowing. And in this way, your long journey through misunderstanding, rejection, isolation, and eventual self-acceptance becomes not just a personal victory, but a gift to the collective unconscious itself. Every person who learns to live authentically despite external pressure makes it slightly easier for the next person to do the same. Every individual who refuses to betray their essential nature for the sake of acceptance creates a small crack in the wall of conformity that others can eventually walk through. This is the ultimate meaning of your difference, the final justification for all the difficulty you have endured. You have become a pioneer of consciousness, a scout who has mapped territory that others will someday explore. Your willingness to be misunderstood has carved out space for understanding. Your acceptance of temporary isolation has created the possibility for deeper connection. Your commitment to inner truth has contributed to the evolution of collective wisdom. But even this sense of service and contribution is held lightly. You have learned that your worth is not dependent on your usefulness to others any more than it was dependent on their approval of you. You exist not to serve some grand purpose that you can articulate or understand, but simply to be yourself as completely and authentically as possible. The service flows naturally from this being, but the being is complete in itself, and so you return to where you started, to the simple, profound act of being yourself. But now you know what you could not know at the beginning, that this is enough, more than enough. It is everything. The self that you have spent so long defending, explaining and trying to validate is already whole, already valuable, already contributing to the great work of consciousness evolution, simply by existing in its full authenticity. The weather patterns of others' opinions continue to move through the sky of your awareness, sometimes stormy, sometimes clear, always changing. But you have learned to live in the landscape beneath, in the stable ground of your own being, in the unchanging truth of who you are when all the external noise falls away. This is the final freedom, not the freedom from misunderstanding, but the freedom to understand yourself so deeply that misunderstanding cannot shake you. Not the freedom from solitude, but the freedom to be so complete in yourself that solitude becomes a choice rather than a burden. Not the freedom from difference, but the freedom to celebrate your difference as the gift it has always been. In this freedom, you discover that you have become what you were seeking all along, not someone who is finally understood by others, but someone who understands themselves so thoroughly that the understanding of others, while pleasant, is no longer necessary for happiness, fulfillment, or peace. You have learned to be your own recognition, your own validation, your own home, and from this home, you can finally offer the world, not what it expects or demands, but what you alone can give, the irreplaceable gift of your authentic being.